and welcome back to the Masters of Modern MMcast podcast. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with Ben Bateman here in the house, and we're doing Dominaria United. We're reviewing some United Dominarians.
I'm pretty excited about this set. I got to tell you, this feels when it comes to power level and kitschiness and all the things that are in this set, it's right up my alley. Like first Dominaria wasn't that powerful. It was pretty good, but it wasn't like insanely powerful, but it had a lot of throwback stuff that was cool. This set feels like it's a combination of Time Spiral and Dominaria. That's what it feels like to me in terms of like kitschiness.
Were you a big Invasion block play? Did you play a lot during Invasion block? That makes sense to me because story wise, they said this is meant to be a throwback specifically to Invasion, where Dominaria was meant to be a throwback to Tempest. Basically.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's a cool set. We have an extraordinary number of cards that are interesting on the list. So I think we have to skip a lot of the interesting cards because they're like almost any kicker card, just for reference, which obviously is a mechanic that originally was created for that block. There's some optionality that you can talk yourself into, which is like in some situations, this could be cool because because they're reasonable early and they're better late. And I think it's hard. You get caught up in wanting to talk about all of those cards. But nonetheless, I think it's a really cool set. I think they did a good job, and I'm excited to talk about it. And
Domain is such a hard mechanic because there's so many cards that like modern 5-color decks are a thing. So like Domain is a much more relevant ability in modern than say in Standard or Commander or even Limited. Like when I was looking at Domain cards for the pre-release event that they did, I was like ignoring every Domain card basically because I'm like, I don't know, I'm not playing more, or they have to be good as a 2. If Domain is 2, this is relevant. But for modern, it's like, oh, I could just put it in 5-color Omnath. Let's go 5-color. Let's do it. So it's really interesting how to like scale a lot of these cards. But we tried rolling it down. We realized that if we wanted to talk about 40 cards, even if we only spent 2 minutes per card, we would be doing an hour and 20-minute episode, and that's
like the old school set reviews we used to do. we used to do the craziest set reviews, like the 2 and 3 parters that would take like 4 or 5 hours. We're gonna try to not do that tonight. So I think
2019, I believe we spent from War of the Spark through Modern Horizons, the core set that year, 12 total weeks of set reviews. So yeah, we're gonna keep that down, but. Before we get started, I do want to do a shout out to our sponsors, Channel Fireball. If you're looking to buy the cards from the set that we're reviewing for your modern deck, they're the ones to go to. They have a great store available for you. If you use the code the MMcast at checkout, they'll really appreciate for us. You can also, if you listen to this in audio or video format, you can watch it from their website. So make sure to check it out there. Also, obviously, if you're on YouTube right now, hit like and subscribe. We want to actually see what card you are most interested in playing. So please comment below with what card you think is best for Modern, which is best for Pioneer, and which one is best for Commander. Your number one pick for all 3 of those formats. We want to hear that in the comments below. And we no longer have a Drop Dots Kickstarter campaign to shout out. So big shout out to our patrons. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. There's normally a pre-show before every episode. Last week, me and Josh Kim talked a big thing about Final Fantasy 14 and One Piece, and we do a bunch of other content, so make sure to check that out. All right, let's
talking about One Piece. Whoever would have seen that coming?
Look, I got look at this crocodile statue. Look how sick this is.
That's pretty
sick.
It's
like made out of sand. All right, all right, so we're gonna start with white cards today, because Wooburg is an order that Scryfall orders cards in. And as I mentioned, Domain, the first card is Leyline Binding. 5 white, enchantment flash. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. So it has the ability in any 5-color deck to cost 1 mana. When Leyline enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Leyline Binding leaves the battlefield. So it's a Soul Ring. Not a Soul Ring. It's a Oblivion Ring variant, but it can be a 1-mana flash Oblivion. The fact that it has flash to me is the big part of it, and the fact that with Domain it doesn't cost that much mana. You just, like in general, in a 3-color deck, which is most modern decks, this is a 3-mana flash O-Ring, and then the moment you enter the world of Omnath, 4-color or above, it starts becoming a 2-mana O-Ring with flash or a 1-mana O-Ring with flash, which has potential to me.
Yeah, I mean the balancing of Domain, as you mentioned in the pre-show, is really an interesting conversation that I think we're going to be having all throughout the show. And I guess the first sort of thing to think about there and this will apply to every card we talk about that has domain, is between fetch lands and shock lands, by the time you get your third land, you can have domain, right? So you're by turn 3, whatever the thing you're trying to do is, you can have your thing that costs 6 that can be 1 cost 1. It's a thing you can do that's not hard to figure out. Now, we all remember back in the day when Wild Nacatl was a thing in the old Zoo decks, that you could get, on turn 2, you could be attacking because you could get so many land types. Same idea. And you wonder, Zoo is probably something that I'm sure we'll touch on at least once tonight and just sort of make reference to, because there are some cards that bring it to mind. But what kind of 5-color shenanigans is somebody going to come up with? And I think this is the first card that,
as early as turn 2, you can have this cost 1 mana, right? You can turn 1 fetch Triumph, turn 2 fetch Shockland, and you now have, and the Shockland can come into play tapped, and you can use the Triumph as long as the Triumph was one of the ones that produces white. You are now in the land of 1 mana Leyline Binding, or any of these domain costs can be 5 mana as soon as turn 2. So I think, and that deck, the type that wants to play Triumphs, is going to be more of a control deck. So I think that's one of the reasons I think this card's really interesting.
Yeah.
Next card, Resolute Reinforcements. 1 white human soldier creature, 1/1 flash. When Resolute Reinforcements enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So historically, 2 mana for a creature type that could have Lord potential that creates a 1/1 token has seen play. This is a less defined. The soldier is not a non-supported tribe, nor is human. Like, human and soldier are both things that are supported. The fact that it has flash is better than any other version of this type of card that's been printed before, other than the fact that it's not a merfolk or not an elf or not a goblin. The one flaw to me is that it makes a soldier creature token and not a human soldier creature token. If it was a human, then it'd be like bonkers. But there's a lord we'll talk about in a second that does have soldier. There's a new 2 mana soldier lord, and there have been 2 mana soldier lords and 3 mana powerful soldier lords in the past.
Yeah, this card, you spelled it out already. The fact that it makes a soldier and not a human is the biggest constraint on this card. In old black-white tokens decks, you'd get 2 for 2, but obviously they're both tokens, so that's how you could balance the cost. I think the one thing I would say, and again, we'll talk about this when we get to that soldier lord you mentioned, but our friend Eric in that format Highlander we've played with it forever, which is between modern and legacy in terms of power level, has had a mono white soldiers deck for years, and he's always kept it in his wheel, and it's always a deck that if it's on the play has a good chance of winning. The vast majority of those cards are modern legal, and those are obviously singleton cards. We've seen it for years. There's a lot of good soldiers. There really are. It's never been pushed in the same way that humans is, but I do think that with this lord and then with this card, it's a tribe I'm pretty sure we'll talk about more. That's my thought on this.
Yeah. I think the big flaw with soldiers in general is it doesn't have a payoff that scales well that this card would benefit, right? Like, elves has elvish archdruid, so the more elves you control, the more mana you make. So making 2 elves for 1 card is really good. Goblins has similar ways to benefit from goblins scaling up and things as powerful. Creatures entering the battlefield a turn or whatever. You have merfolk, is more about pumping. So that's closer to soldiers. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Ben, you're next.
My first card I'm going to talk about is, and this is just an interesting one. I'll make one comment on. You can tell me if you think it's interesting or not. It's Benelish Sleeper. It's a common. It's white 1 for a 3/1 for Phyrexian Human Soldier. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, each player sacks a creature. It kicks for 1 black. So we've obviously had over the years. We haven't seen in modern much of these cards show up the Fleshbag Marauder type, but they're very popular. They get printed every few years.
See play in modern for sure. There's been a bunch printed recently, but they don't scale down to modern.
They don't show up. They're much more playable in Commander. That's where historically they are seen. The only reason I put this down is because 2 mana for a 3/1 in terms of it being an aggressive card is already kind of like a reasonable rate. Like, a 3 power for 2, if you're going to put that in the right aggressive deck, is doable. It is a human and a soldier, and the fact that it can scale up to, if you want it to clear the way, is actually not bad. Like, I sort of imagine that there's probably a deck that could exist with this, and maybe this is more of a standard play where something will come out before this, and this will curve out into a flesh bag, sacrifice the blocker, you'll sack your token or whatever thing that came out before this. And then, it's like, I could see that being a thing. I don't think it's likely, but I did think it was interesting because we haven't seen this card before. That's not a thing that we never had an optional flesh bag like that.
I definitely see that seeing play in Commander. or not Commander, in Standard, because I think it's right on, and like Flashback Martyr, that's 2 mana sometimes is really good. I think this card would have shot up on my list in power level if Lurrus was still legal in the format, because it's playable with Lurrus as a companion. In fact, the one place I do see myself playing this outside of Limited more than anywhere else is in Commander, in a deck where I have Lurrus as a companion, like my best friend's deck, where it's like, there it's great because it death triggers and does all this other stuff, but it's 2 mana, so you can keep rebuying it with Lurrus. Without Lurrus being in the format, it definitely drops farther down the list, which sucks. I mean, like, it's good that Lurrus is banned, but it sucks that stuff like this doesn't get like that nice power bump. Next card is let's jump to the Lord. It's a little bit alphabetically out of order, but 1 white, core soldier, valiant veteran, 2/2. Other soldier creatures you control get +1/+1. Exile valiant veteran from your graveyard for 3 white. Put a +1/+1 counter on each soldier you control. I do like that. I'm a big fan of being able to rebuy stuff out of the graveyard. The fact that it's a core long term could be cool. Cores could like randomly sneak up and be a good creature type, and like a lot of them are core soldiers or make soldier tokens, so like it weirdly could just benefit core decks. The fact that it's not a human makes it a lot worse. I don't think anything on this card though, unless we get some cool soldiers from the graveyard mechanics that are like self-mill white black soldier things, really make soldiers good enough or better than, say, even illusions in Modern.
There's like no, I mean, I think there's more potential with soldiers. There's weird sneaky cards that people don't think about that if you go tribal like this are way better than you realize. Like, did you realize Dryad Militant is a soldier? It's a 2 mana. It's a 1 mana 2/1 that whenever an instant or sorcery goes into your opponent's graveyard from anywhere, it gets exiled. So all of the spell decks, you just have a nerf your graveyard 2/1 for 1. Like, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, there's a lot of soldiers that are interesting that you can curve out really nicely with. I think that this card is going to be. We're going to talk about each of the lords, but I think this card is going to push that conversation. So I agree, it's an interesting card. The core thing is not notable.
Yeah, my issue more is just like all of those soldiers kind of just like don't do something better than Merfolk does.
Well, yeah, I mean, so that's an interesting point you make, and I think I'll wait to expound on it more until we get to some of the other tribes, because I do think that conversation of a tribal deck, it's not really that's a flavor of the month thing. Like, you could play any good tribal deck, but what's the best tribal deck is sort of the question. I think our white cards looking.
And how does it attack decks in the metagame in a way that's better than what other ones are doing? Right. The reason humans worked is because not only did it create this really good beatdown deck that took advantage of Collected Company, but it also was able to take advantage of the fact that you had the blue-white interaction human that when it entered play, you could turn cards for that your opponent was going to be playing turning off. It got to play stuff like Thalia. If you looked at Spirits, the reason that worked is because it would be able to combine Spell Queller and Collected Company to make a really powerful draw-go engine that kind of played like old Fairies decks used to play. If you look at Elves, the ability to create so much mana and draw so many cards creates such a powerful engine that you're able to win with. If you look at Goblins, the ability for Snoop and Kiki Jiki to combo with each other off the top of your deck creates an automatic win condition. So, like, if Soldiers has something like that it's attacking decks in a powerful way that is broken, but then in the meantime it's beating you down with an aggressive deck, then I'm all ears. But that's
kind of the whole reason it's kind of the whole reason vampires and zombies have been second tier tribal decks for years, because they're just cool, they have good lords, and they don't get pushed. Our white cards,
the moment they print Phyrexian Altar on a like a 2-drop zombie or a 3-drop zombie, Zombies becomes a real deck.
Yeah, agreed. I believe our white cards are also the same. So what you have is what I have. So we can go through the rest of your list here.
All right, Sarah Paragon, 2 white creature angel flying. Once during each of your turns, you may play a land from your graveyard or cast a permanent spell with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard. If you do, it gains when this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, exile, and gain 2 life. It is a 3/4 flying angel. I think it's just a little too slow for Modern. I think this card's like bonkers Modern playable 5 years ago. It's just so easy to kill this. The one benefit is that on turn 5, you can play this and immediately get to play a fetch land. So you're at least getting that effect from it. And it does offer a really cool like lands matter feature to white that we haven't really seen before. I think it's cool for white to get basically what amounts to Ramunap Ramana Excavator is now a white ability, which I think is really cool. But I think it's just missing, but it's really close from a value perspective.
Yeah, I think this card is cool. Obviously, you know, it harkens back to a Sun Titan kind of an effect, and there's a lot of stuff on this list that I had to leave off because I feel like this set kind of defines the old idea that you and I used to talk about all the time of if it costs 3 or it costs 4, but it's not doing something really, really intense right when it comes down. It's extremely hard to justify in Modern, and that has never been more true than now. I mean, Modern is almost twice as powerful as it used to be when we used to say that. So that's why you can have a card like this that is so busted in terms of its upside. Like you can do so much of this card, but it's just gets answered by so many things and it doesn't fit into an archetype that's going to be oppressive at all. So it's just ends up just being a power card that's just, you know.
I do think that Lurrus decks, or even like that we're playing white, that maybe fell a little bit out of favor, like a honestly an Abzan deck that plays a lot of what the Lurrus package was, or even like a Mardu deck. This could fit where Lurrus did before. Like being able to play this and then rebuy your Dragon Rage Channelers or rebuy your Ragavans seems actually pretty decent. So I wouldn't take it totally out of the running as cards because of how good Lurrus was. And this in some ways is 2 mana cheaper than Lurrus was in Modern for a while. It's close. I think this card's close, and I think it's going to miss it, but I think it had a chance, or has a chance. And then the last white card I have is Temporary Lockdown. 1 white enchantment. When this enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until Temporary Lockdown leaves the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, this card is, you know, obviously, I don't think this is more than a one of main deck in any deck. Maybe the white control decks or the blue-white control decks would play one of these or something, and those decks aren't even very prominent right now. Where I would see this being good is if you're, you know, Blue-Red Murktide, for instance, Dragon Rage Channeler, Codex Shredder, Ragavan, the versions of those decks that are shadow decks with a lot of the same cards. Almost all the threats cost 1. The only threat that costs more than 1 or 2 is Murktide. But if you're a control deck in blue-white, you've got plenty of ways to deal with a Murktide. Like that, you're not really worried about a single Murktide. So what this card effectively does is allows you to, for 3 mana, answer probably a 2-for-1. You're probably going to get rid of like a Ragavan and a Codex Shredder or something like that. Or Codex Shredder? Not Codex Shredder. Shredder. Ledger Shredder. That's what I meant to say. I kept saying Codex. So I think, you know, in that sense, it's good. It's one of the best 3 mana answers that white blue or any control deck, you know, a Jeskai deck is going to have. I could see 1 or 2 of these in sideboards because those 1 CMC and 2 CMC threats are so prominent in Modern lately. But I don't think this is main deckable. I think it's perhaps a 1 or 2 of in sideboards.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I agree. I think this might be one of the best cards in the set. The more I look at decks on this list, like against Hammer Time, there is 1 card in the entire deck that this doesn't exile when it comes into play, being Cauldron Complete. Or Cauldron Complete and Nettle Cyst are the 2 cards that it doesn't answer. It just totally wipes the board,
nukes all the creatures, nukes all the equipment,
and exiles them forever. Against, you know, the like anything that's playing Ragavans, it eats most of their decks. It eats a chunk of the Yawgmoth decks. Even it doesn't get rid of Yawgmoth, but it gets rid of everything else.
Oh, yeah,
Murktide, as you mentioned, it's really good against. The Crashing Footfall decks, this gets rid of the rhinos when it enters play forever.
It's not non-token, right? It's just non-land.
Yeah. It gets rid of the like against like a Jund deck or a Death Shadows deck, it just like eats every threat that those decks have. You get rid of Wrenn and 6, you get rid of everything that Urza Saga finds, you get rid of Ragavan, Dragon Rage Channeler, Death Shadow. So much of the format is 1 and 2 drops, and this like as a 1 drop, like I would play 1 in my main deck and 1 in my sideboard, or if not 2 in my sideboard out of any blue-white control deck, and like even up to the like more blinky Omnath Yorion decks, playing 2 of these in my main just as like a catch-all. Like so many of the format just gets eaten by this, and it's not hard to play a deck that gets to play this and then doesn't get negatively affected by it.
Yeah.
Plus Yorion decks could just blink it, and like if they play some more, just have Yorion blink it, they get everything back for a second, and then you eat all of them again.
I think you're probably right. It is probably better than I was giving it credit for. I guess we haven't really seen something that does this, right? It's unique in that sense. It doesn't have a comp. So yeah. I think this card is one of the better cards in the set. All right, so moving on from white, we're going to get into blue now. I'm going to jump in here first with my blue cards. The first one I'm going to go with, and this is going to be one of those silly cards that you and I talked about before the show. I'm just going to kind of give you my pitch on this because I love cards like this. And if you have anything to say, you can, or you can just tell me that's silly. The card is Combat Research. It's 1 blue. It's an enchantment creature aura. Enchanted creature has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. As long as the enchanted creature is legendary, it gets +1/+1 and has Ward 1. So remember how good Curious Obsession was and how much I loved that card and how much play that card
Sure.
saw? And that card's always been fringe playable in Modern anyway. Like, it's been right on the edge. This card, if you put it on the right creature, and they just keep printing legendary creatures, right? They just keep printing good ones. This set even leans harder into getting the benefit of playing more of them. This is Curiosity that gives +1/+1 and protects the creature with Ward 1. Like, I just think, I'm not saying this is like a shoe-in. I just think that if this deck ever was to gain prominence, or the right legendary looter type of creature gets printed, this is just bananas. It's such an easy, such a good card advantage engine. It buffs your creature, protects your creature, and lets you get card advantage. I mean, I love it. I know there's no deck for it. I just think it's a really cool card, personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest limitation to me is like Curious Obsession. Like, those types of decks want to play with stuff that already has hexproof, so the ward doesn't matter. And then now you need it to be like specifically legendary. But I would love to strap this onto a Geist of Saint Traft. I guess my point is, like, with Geist of Saint Traft, I'd rather play something else.
Yeah, it's
so that's the real limitation, is like what legendary creature that has ward that wants this deck. But that's, I mean, I do. It has a pedigree that makes it playable for sure.
Yeah.
A Haughty Djinn, 1 blue Djinn, X or star 4, flying. When Haughty Djinn's power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast.
I didn't put this on my list. I looked at this card. I was mumbling when you and I were talking in the pre-show, and I was like, just don't think that's good enough. I was trying to figure out, like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, so you cast it not on turn 3. You cast it a little later when you have mana open to protect it, right? This is a relatively cheap way to finish off your opponent, because you've got, it's probably like
I played on turn 3. Just cast it on turn 3.
And then they just kill it.
Play Ledger Shredder, and then play this, and then you've looted some spells. And on turn 1, you loot it. You played some spells, and on turn 4, you like mana Morphos and play other like cantripy opt spells just to make it big and swing for like 5 in the air.
I guess it costs 3. It doesn't do anything the turn it comes down. It doesn't protect itself. It gets nuked by them getting rid of your graveyard. There's like a lot of creatures that over the years have cost 3 that have been like comps to this. Well, but they don't even
imagine if Goblin Electromancer could kill a person by attacking in one swing.
Yes, I think my
argument
against it is like my point against that is that, like, the reason Goblin Electromancer, which I have tried to make work in various decks in Modern for years as a clever card outside of Storm, the reason it's not good is because the cards that go along with it primarily cost 1. You don't actually have a colorless cost in most of those cards. Like Manamorphose, you accelerate, but a lot of those cards are 1-mana cantrips that aren't actually made much better by it. So the cost reduction in Modern is kind of negligible. I've always found you have to play with stuff that, like,
well, I'm thinking in literal Storm. Like, you play 2 of these in your Storm deck instead of the Brawls, right? And now
this is just your other axis to win in a Storm deck.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is a harder to kill. Like, it's Lightning Bolt. Like, Lightning Bolt can't kill it, right? Fatal Push, they need a fetch for it, so it's more removal resistant than normal. And now you have a, like, if I don't have the right gas to kill you, or you counter the right part of my Storm combo, I still have a 7/4 flyer. Good luck.
I think that's a fair point. I think that's cool. I still think, like, a Storm deck that's spending 3 mana to do anything that isn't just like winning is rough. Like, if you're getting to the stall point in the game and you're casting this and then having to like untap and not just winning on the next turn, feels like they'll kill you by the time you could even like swing 3 times. Like, this is probably like 7 power, maybe 8, maybe, you know, like, I don't know.
Well, in Storm, I think this in Storm can be like a 12/12 with a 12/4 pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think this card's cool. I guess I'm mostly just annoyed because the card's like so up my alley and I didn't put it on my list. I'm mad at you. All right, I'll go next here with a card that I believe is on both of our lists. It's called Rona's Vortex. It is an instant for 1 blue. Return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. If this permanent was kicked, put that permanent on the bottom of its owner's library. Instead, it has kicker black 2. So, like, Unsummon has not classically seen play. Vapor Snag in tempo decks years ago did see play, right? There's some pedigree that if you're in the right deck, a tempo card is good. However, this can also bounce a Planeswalker for 1 blue. So like, Jace the Mind Sculptor comes down for 4, you pay 1 to put it back in their hand. There are enough Planeswalkers that are good in Modern that see play, that getting it back in their hand for 1 is good. And then the fact that if you draw this later in a tempo deck, for 4 mana, it just gets rid of the Planeswalker, or it just gets rid of a Murktide, does make this card actually feel like, already if I just bounce your Murktide after you've exiled your graveyard, I'm pretty good with that. Like, I don't mind in probably in Shadow. This is probably in Grixis Shadow, something like that.
Also, it's good against the Ledger Shredder, right? Like they've gone the value, but you're no longer getting hit by how big it is based on what they've been discarding. It gets rid of a Murktide. It buys you time against some of the other creatures that you'd want to buy against. It bounces a Planeswalker in control decks, especially Grixis ones. It values you into a counter spell, right? Like you can always have the option of like turn 1, they play a threat that you have a counter spell for because it's turn 1, you weren't able to cast it. End of their turn, you bounce it. Turn 2, you play your second land, and now they never get to play a spell again that you can't counter. And to your point, on starting turn 4 at instant speed, you now have murder any threat that you'd want. So I think this card's like probably underrated. Like,
yeah, I think it appealed to both of us for. I think it appealed to us for kind of the same reason in general. I don't think it's powerful. I just think it's clever and it has some potential. Would be like where I would go with it. It looks like your next card is one I have as well, which is Impulse. And this is a really interesting card that goes back to my days, because I played Magic a little before you did. This is an original card selection spell for those that don't know, from Visions, I believe. I think it's originally printed in Visions. It's blue 1, and it states instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Notably, they kept the old text, did not get errated. You put the cards on the bottom in any order, which is very rarely relevant, but all templates after this stated in a random order. But that doesn't matter hardly. It's like there's weird cards they'll bring back. Impulse was a card for years and continues to be a card in the eternal formats like Commander and Highlander and these where you play it. It's like a really good instant speed, permission card. Like, this is a really, really good dig card. It's weird that it can be printed at common now. Like, it has a lot of application, but I guess it's just not that powerful.
Well, so like I would say this would be an immediate snap playable in Modern if it wasn't for compulsive research, right? Yeah. Like, it's competing in that space. That being said, I still think this card's really good. It's an instant. There are decks that aren't blue-red that could be using this kind of card filtration. Like, I can see this seeing play in a lot of different decks. I think this becomes a pretty quick, if not staple in Modern, like active card people play with. Like Telling Time has seen a ton of play, and there's a ton of variants similar to Telling Time that have seen play in Modern, and this is just strictly better. Not strictly better, but mostly better than most of those effects. And so if you're not able to play compulsive research, but you want a 2 mana dig spell, this is, I think, one of the best options of the format now. And I do think, yeah.
I was going to say the biggest restriction on this card now is that the Telling Time was replaced by the vastly superior version called Expressive Iteration, which is one of the best draw spells ever printed.
Oh, I've been saying compulsive research. I meant Expressive Iteration. I apologize.
I was wondering because I was like, that's the 3 mana artifact one.
No. Yeah. Expressive Iteration. Sorry.
That card is bananas. It's extremely good. This card is not as good as that. Because he only can get you 1 card. But yeah, I do think that, that card, that's a sorcery. So there is that.
And it's blue-red. Like, there are decks that want to be able to dig well, like a blue-green Titan deck or any of the blue-white control decks that don't play blue-red. And if that's the case, this is your best option.
Yeah.
And is better. Like, it does give, like, Snapcaster Mage has definitely fallen out of favor, but it gives another reason to bring back kind of the draw go style blue responsive decks, and this is another good reason for that, because now you have something on turn 4 that if they don't play a spell into your counter spell, this is a great option instead.
Yeah.
Next card on my list is Micromancer, 3 blue human wizard 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an instant or sorcery card with mana value 1, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now, this says like CDH contention because it finds the mana consultation. I do think that there's like going to be moments where there's a 1 mana instant or sorcery that a deck in blue just like can win the game with if they draw it. I don't think Modern has one right now.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at this card and my thought was that it
Cost 4
didn't do
mana.
enough for its cost with what was available in Modern. Like I couldn't figure out a way that this card was going to come down on 4 and then you would untap and be able to do like something powerful enough to justify it costing 4. So that was kind of my argument against it.
Nope, I think that's fair. I think this card is bonkers in other formats. They're just not. Eventually, there could be a card that makes it really, really playable. At the moment, that doesn't exist. I do love the idea of seeing the Trinket Mage cycle, but at 4 mana for spells.
Yes, agreed. I think,
Give me
if you're
a 2 mana one and give me a 6 mana one.
if you're going to cost them at 4 as well, like you can just do a lot of like they can be powerful because they cost 4.
Mm-hmm.
Next up, you've got Tolarian Terror, which is blue 6 for a 5/5 serpent. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard, and it has ward 2. So weirdly, in the opposite of a Murktide, this card doesn't want to exile instants and sorceries. It's a deck that wants to leave them in the graveyard. And if you can self-mill or have lots of spells, then you can get yourself like a 1 or a 2 or a 3 mana 5/5 pretty quickly in the game that protects itself and has ward. Pretty good, I think. I
think this card's really interesting, like in Phoenix decks, right? Like where you don't want to be exiling your graveyard, so Murktide doesn't work, but the Phoenix deck like wants to get as many cards in their graveyard and cast as many spells as possible. That's also, by the way, another deck that I think the Djinn could see play, because the red blue 4 mana when it enters the battlefield draw a card version of the Djinn has seen play in Modern, not a ton, but some.
Crackling
and I
Drake.
think
The old
Crackling Drake, and so Djinn can kind of play in that space. Tolarian Terror plays in that same space. I do think also if like Murktide ever gets banned, which is totally possible, this becomes a lot better. Like the fact that this card exists, and in a world where like stuff like Tasigur was like a Modern staple for years, and then this like is in some ways not better than Tasigur or Murktide. Not Murktide. What's the 5 mana with the 5/5 fish?
Oh, Angler, Gurmag Angler.
Gurmag Angler were like staples of Modern, and this card just like doesn't like is better in multiples. Like you can get that to be pretty cheap. I do think this is like in Pioneer a way more likely staple.
I think the issue I have with this card, and the biggest limitation this card has, is that there's a lot of hate for decks in Modern that want your graveyard to be stocked.
Yeah.
Use. So there's already lots of strategies that just want to not let you do this. And this card is super bad if you don't have that, because like,
well, but it isn't super hard to like the type of deck that is best at refilling its graveyard after graveyard 8 are the spell ones, right? Because it's like I played a bunch of spells that draw cards. Those spells that draw cards turn this on. They exile my graveyard. Well, I still have all the cards I drew from the cards that I drew that draw cards that I can now cast. But like you're correct that graveyards are pretty fragile, for sure. Next card is Vodalian Hexcatcher. 1 in a blue, Merfolk Wizard, 1/1 flash. Other Merfolk you control get +1/+1. Sacrifice a Merfolk, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. Is this the best Merfolk ever printed?
This card got me pretty excited. The professor and I are both big fans of Merfolk. That's always one of the things we bond on. And I have to think he's pretty stoked on this card. Feels like it's right up his alley. I definitely read this card and was kind of like, I don't think there's a better Lord than this. And I was trying to figure out in my mind if I thought there was a better Merfolk. I think, probably like Silvergill, like 2/1 for 2 that draws your card is pretty good. That's like a really, really, really strong contender. I mean, this is a Lord that makes everything a curse catcher, and it doesn't cost double blue. So like it's pushing the tribe. You want to talk about like our preview card from Ixalan and compared to this?
Oh yeah. And it has flash, right? Like this is a force spike against any non-creature spell. Not force spike, but this is 2 mana counter a spell unless they pay 1 mana against any non-creature spell. Because you don't like you can sacrifice itself. It sacrifice any Merfolk, which itself is 1. So like I don't know. Like this card seems so bonkers to me, and exactly what that deck needs to try and be viable in Modern. So I'm really hyped. This card's so cool.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is really cool. Also, isn't it funny that like Curse Catcher stopped seeing play in Merfolk, and then they print a card that's like, oh, okay, you guys don't want to play Curse Catcher anymore? We'll just make all of the
Hex Catcher.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The card is really powerful. I mean, it's one of my favorite cards in the whole set for sure. I got really excited visibly when I saw it. I have a couple more cards in blue here. So my next one is actually a card that I'm sort of like, I was like scratching my head about this card because I don't know what to do with it, but I wonder if you'll have ideas because it does seem like it's up your alley. So Battlewing Mystic. It's blue 1 for a 2/1 flying bird wizard. Okay, but it has kicker red. When Battlewing Mystic enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, discard your hand, then draw 2 cards. So what we have here is a 2/1 flyer for 2 that if you spend 3, it allows you to discard your hand and draw 2. Like, that's not a very expensive upcharge to discard your hand and draw 2, considering the number of decks in Modern that don't care and like want you to discard cards. I just was like sort of looking at this and like, there has to be some way to abuse this card because I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just one of those, like exactly what I said when we opened the show, which is an interesting kicker card that I can't wrap my head around. But I don't think I've ever seen this. Like imagine that I was like, okay, here's your, it's a blue, red 1 sorcery, discard your hand, draw 2. You'd be like, yeah, that's not really playable. And I'd be like, okay, well, what if you get like a 1/1 token? You'd be like, okay, it's probably bad, but maybe playable. And it's like, what if you get a 2/1 evasive creature that does that you don't even need to do it? You can actually just get the creature if you want to. I don't know. Like, it's unique.
I think it's really close. And like, obviously there's discard outlet strategies and there's dread strategy that goes along with this. I think this is another card to me that I was like, if Lurrus was still unbanned, this card would be so sick. As is without Lurrus, I think it's borderline. I think like it's almost powerful enough. And like if someone showed up and was playing 4 of these in a deck, I would not blink. Yeah. Right. Like it would be like, yeah, that makes sense. That card's sick.
I think it's one of the most underrated cards in the set because I always use the when you and I talk about this stuff, I always use the same comp, which is like, have you seen something that does this before? And the answer to this is no. So like, I've never seen this before, and I feel like there could be something cool there. The next card I have is Founding the Third Path. So this is one of the read ahead sagas. It's blue 1. Mm-hmm. Now the difference on the read ahead mechanic for you guys is that you're allowed to pick which of the different pieces of the saga you want to start on. Now you don't get to, if you start on 3, you just get 3. So it's not like you get more of them. But if you want to, for instance, play this and just get the third mode of the saga, you get that. So I think this is actually a super strong card in the mill decks. I think this card is really good. It's blue 1. Mode 1 is you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. Mode 2 is target player mills 4 cards. Mode 3, exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy it, you may cast the copy. So the reason I think this card is notable and the reason that I pulled it, because I didn't think any of the other sagas were good enough, is that if you're playing the mill deck, right, like whether it's the Maddening Cacophony or Glimpse the Unthinkable, you can play this on turn 2 and you just get to cast Glimpse on turn 2. So you mill them 10 and this just comes down, right? Then the next turn you get a free mill 4. So, okay, you're an incidental mill 4. And then the next turn you can sequence it so that now you're exiling that Glimpse from turn 2 and you're getting to cast it for 2. So, and it happens automatically. It doesn't cost you any mana. So you get a second Glimpse the Unthinkable a turn after you get the one on turn 2. So the card that you have lost in your hand for playing this in the first place has gotten you now an extra 4 cards, and it's just turned into another copy of Glimpse. Whether it's Glimpse or it's Cacophony or any card that's going to mill anywhere between 8 and 12 cards, to me, it's like, this is a pretty solid sequencing play in that deck. There's probably others that it's good in, whereas I think this is intended to mill yourself. I think the mill deck in Modern is good enough anyway that I actually think this card is pretty good. I read it and the mill deck was the first thing I thought of.
I mean, yeah, for basically it kind of reads like for 2 mana, add mill 4 and flashback to Glimpse the Unthinkable.
Yeah, mill 4 and flashback, right? That's 2 CMC mill spell, which the deck plays a bunch of. So like,
that's what I said. Yeah, Glimpse the Unthinkable is my go-to, right? Or like whatever one you're talking about. I think in that idea, that's pretty cool. Like I didn't think through on that one. I think that's I definitely saw it as like a self-mill thing, which then isn't terrible either, especially because like this reads 2 mana in Phoenix of like, play a card for 2 mana, mill self 4, so draw 4 cards ostensibly in that deck, and then start the chain off on your turn to get to cast one of those spells to get your Phoenixes into play. So like, I think on both ends it's pretty sick. I agree. This card's pretty tight.
The last blue card that I wrote down is a card that, again, I'm surprised you didn't write down because I feel like you would have had more thoughts on this. And it's Joint Exploration. It's an instant. Blue 1, scry 2, then draw a card. If this spell was kicked, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, and the kicker is only 1 green. So for its base cost, it's blue 1, scry 2, draw. Right? That's the standard mode. Pretty decent. It's 2 mana, instant speed, Omen of the Sea. But for 1 green, you can accelerate and explore, right? Like you get to put a land from your hand on the battlefield, and the fact that it's an instant, it reminds me of Growth Spiral. But you have the scry that digs you into exactly what you need to make this card relevant. I read this card as the kind of card that's like one of those 2 CMC blue cantrips that we always see in the sets, and we're like, I wonder if that's good. And then we're like, oh, look at that! This deck in Modern that's really good is playing 3 of these.
Sure.
I read this as one of those like kind of slightly undercosted. It just seems like what Growth Spiral was doing. This is that, but it has more optionality because of the scry. It means that you get to pay off what you want to do with it like a lot more easily.
Sure. I think just like 2 mana to scry 2 draw a card just like hasn't been good enough in Modern, even at instant speed for a while. Now,
I mean, the blue-white decks were playing Omen of the Sea for a while. Like that was a thing. Like that used to be a year or 2 ago. That was like a really good thing you could do.
Part of me kind of wish this was like 1 mana draw card and then kicker white green scry 2,
sure,
and put a land into play, right? Like have the cantrip side be cheaper. But I think it's pretty cool. I think this definitely has like once again, if I saw this seeing play and someone was like, I'm playing 4 of these in like a not Tron deck in a Primeval Titan deck, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. This seems good in that deck. You're ramping really easily. You get to take advantage of your bounce land effect. That's always really good with the play extra land cards. The instant speed scry lets you counter spells. Sure.
Yeah. So that was my thought. I think with black, which is our next color here, you and I were both pretty excited about this next card. I remember you texted me a picture of this. The card is Cut Down. You can take this one if you want.
Yeah, so it's 1 black for an instant, destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. This kills most creatures in Modern that Fatal Push kills, and a lot that Fatal Push doesn't kill, and some that Fatal Push kills that this can't kill, right? Like, of course, it kills. Interesting ones are like, it does kill Solitude, which I think is like obviously really important. It can't kill Omnath where Fatal Push can. It kills everything out of Hammer Time, and it kills everything but specifically Murktide Regent in the Murktide deck. Other than a turned on Dragon Rage Channeler.
No, this can't kill Murktide. Or you're saying it couldn't kill Murktide?
That's what I said.
Oh yeah, okay, I misunderstood you.
Yeah, I can't kill Murktide. I think like that's literally Murktide's the main thing that's keeping it down, because Ledger Shredder gets out of range for cut down pretty quickly. Dragon Rage Channeler, as soon as you have your graveyard turn on, is outside of the range, and Murktide Regent is. Otherwise, this card kills a lot of things in this format. But the Murktide Regent deck specifically is the thing that's hurting cut down the most.
I think, its biggest limitation is that like what is good in Modern is to get lots of power for low CMC, not to get like high CMC for low power that has like a good ability. Like the fact that Murktide kind of does both, which is what makes that card so good. But it's the sort of cheating stuff out nature of this is what makes this card just not quite good enough. Though it is interesting, right. And there are probably certain decks that will become prominent, and you'll start to see this in sideboards in the same way that like Ceremonious Rejection is in decks, where it's like, oh, when certain things are good, this is always going to be good. Because it's
I can also effect. Sorry. I can see like decks that are like 4 Fatal Push being 3 Fatal Push one of these, or 2 Fatal Push 2 of these, right? Where it's like a small hedge for when you're playing against the deck that is playing cards that Fatal Push can't deal with and Cut Down can, like Solitude decks, So I that's the one place I can see it being interesting, but it's going to be dependent on that world. The next card is the Raven Man. 1 black, legendary creature, human wizard, 2/1. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 black bird creature toga with flying, and this creature can't block. 3 black, tap. Each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery. The thing that's most interesting to me on this is that it triggers off of you discarding as well. So it's not just your opponents. It's you discarding on your turn. So this into Liliana the Veil, which is literally the point. Like this card was printed with Liliana the Veil in the set because they want you to play a 1-mana black card followed by Raven Man, followed by Liliana, and then every turn you get a bird token. So
I mean, it's even in the name of the other cards that go with this, right? Raven's Crime. Like if you play a Raven's Crime Flame Jab deck, right, that's trying to take advantage of that, like it's so good. Obviously, like you, but I mean, like just the idea that like you are going to turn one Thoughtseize them to get rid of whatever answer they might have, and then you're going to play the Raven Man, and then after that, your deck is going to be a sequence of like Hand Disruption, Burn, Liliana, and then like Retrace spells, which is that's like the first place my mind went to, where like no matter what you're doing, every single turn, a player will discard, whether you're just like Raven's Criming them out or you're just going to just continue to flame jab them. But every time you flame jab them, you get a 1/1 flyer at the end of turn. Like if flame jab reads deal 1 anywhere you want, but then also get a 1/1 flyer at the end of turn for free, becomes real good.
I think my issue with the card originally was focusing on having your opponent discard the cards, because my problem with those types of decks, and 1v1 that's a lot less problematic, because if you get 3 birds off of this, you're like A+ golden. But with the Raven Man, like often like discarding your opponent's hands, like eventually they run out of steam, and now this card doesn't do anything. It's a 2/1 that doesn't do anything. But because he does trigger off of your cards discarding, you can play around more with like Dredge or Squee type effects, or just any deck that wants to be doing some type of discard effect for themselves. He like now starts building a little army out of the can to stabilize yourself with through, putting pressure on your opponent while you're building your other engine to go off. But I do think he's really close. I think he's just small enough to not technically be modern playable. Like, I don't know if he's better than Dark Confidant, right? But I think it's
say possible. The deck we used to. Okay, so I was talking about like some shenanigans brew that I had in mind. Do you know a deck this is just incredibly good in? And like, if this doesn't come back, I'll be kind of shocked. This just slots directly into Mardu Pyromancer. This is so good in that deck because you think about playing this alongside playing this alongside Young Pyromancer. Already, basically, it's numbers 5 through 8 of the same kind of effect, right? Because like end of turn, if you're playing spells that make them discard things, you're going to get a 1/1, and the Pyromancer just does it every time you cast a spell. You're already playing Kolaghan's Command, which is just good in the deck anyway. But Kolaghan's Command means that you have instant speed discard, so you can do it on their turn, and you can get yourself a 1/1 at the end of their turn just by using the instant speed discard. Like many of the things that make that deck good in the first place play really well with the Raven Man. I think I would slot 2 or 3 of these into that deck and see if you run that back how good it gets. Maybe even play around a little bit with the retrace spells in there just because they're already decent and they're especially good with him. That seems really fun to me. My only last black card, unless you had anything else to say here.
The other card that we had a really like talked about a lot in this podcast today is Ledger Shredder. That works really well with Raven Man as well, right? And like, so I think there's just like a lot of looting and rummaging effects that we can benefit with this card that could be really interesting. And that way you also keep out from running out of gas.
Agreed. Like it's like something in that style. I think this card will fit nicely into. It is legendary, and that is a deck that like goes through its cards pretty fast. So it makes me a little nervous because I like if Young Pyromancer was legendary, for instance, that deck would have been much harder to play. But I still think like a 2 or 3 of in one of those styles could work. The last black card I had that I thought was cool was Shadowrite Priest. This is one of the others in the cycle of lords. It's a weird one because it's a cleric lord. It's black-white for a 2/2. Sorry, black 1 for a human cleric 2/2. Other clerics get +1/+1 that you control. And then this is the big ability, which is black 3, tap, sacrifice another cleric, search your library for a black creature card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Like, obviously, Gristlebrand comes to mind, whatever the biggest black creatures that are the coolest that you can play in Modern are. I haven't done an exhaustive search on clerics in Modern to like see what interesting clerics are out there that would be really good with this. And 5's pretty expensive, especially when you need to tap 5. But it comes down on two. Like, it's not that unreasonable to think that you're playing an aggressive deck with like a Gristlebrand in it, and then like it's only sacrifice another cleric, right? So like, let's pretend you're curving out into some cool deck, whether it's black or black white, that's playing a bunch of clerics. You're beating them down, and you're just like play your fifth land and pass. Now your opponent knows, like, end of turn, if I don't do something, they're just going to sacrifice whatever dumb 2-drop they have, and then have a Gristlebrand in play. Like, that's going to end the game. So I do think that's a pretty unique ability, because it doesn't say a black demon creature or like a black, cleric creature. It's a black creature card. You can get things that are multicolor. You could get freaking Progenitus. Like, you can get anything.
Yeah, I think there are really, like, the closest deck, like the cool thing is that there is a lot of really powerful clerics, or a lot of the cards can just be clerics in the Soul Sisters deck, right? Like Soul's Attendant and all the souls are clerics. You also get core, the Mother of Runes, the core Mother of Runes is a cleric.
Oh yeah. Giver of Runes.
Giver of Runes. Ariok Champion is a cleric. You get so like there's a lot of like cool hate bears Soul Sister cards that are already clerics, and this like pumps a lot of your cards that classically like kind of just don't do anything unless you're playing the human tribal side. It's in a color that classically those decks aren't playing, but black, like a Blood Artist style version of Soul Sisters, is not out of the question. The real question is like, what are you tutoring for? If there's a creature that combos with those that you want cheaply, then I start getting really excited by this card, right? Is if there's like an infinite combo, a Kiki Jiki like effect, and this might just exist already that I'm not thinking of in white black, then this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said it a second ago, right? Like, Gristlebrand is the classic expensive good black one. I'm looking at the most expensive black creatures ever printed here real fast, just to see like what it could be, right? No,
it doesn't put it into play. It doesn't put it into play though, right?
It does.
Oh, it puts it into play. So then Grizzlebrand is the answer. I agree with that. Like it like having one Grizzlebrand in Soul Sisters, because you gain so much life, you just win.
I think Gristlebrand and Progenitus are the two that come to mind for me that are like the interesting ones. Progenitus is like the coolest option, I think. Gristlebrand is the best option.
Is it Vils? Vils is the demon that every time you gain life, draw a card.
I've got it. Vils, yeah, Broker of Blood, the 8 mana 8/8. You can pay to, yeah. Whenever you lose life, draw that many cards.
Oh, it's lose life. Okay.
Yeah, I think if you were going to try to take advantage of this ability, which like does seem a little dubious, by the way, like I'm for the record, like I think we all know it's like a little bit of a stretch, but if you were going to do that, I think it's probably Gristlebrand or Progenitus would be the big easy go-to twos. Like, you get a giant protection from everything card that like can win, or you get like a really good mono black card that could be cast anyway. It's cool. I don't expect this to be big, but I do like it. Do you have anything else to say on black before we move on to red?
I'm still, I think there are weird demons out there that are specifically like not good enough to reanimate, right, in a regular deck. And Soul Sisters classically hasn't wanted to do that. But in a deck like Soul Sisters that has a very specific game plan, that gaining life is like they're getting a lot of micro triggers on life gain, right? And there are black cards that trigger powerful effects on that. I actually think there's like this card maybe is a legit thing there. I just don't know. I'm trying to find like a demon that does this, what I'm thinking these cards do. But yeah, it exists. I know it exists. I just don't know what it is. So chat, please tell me what the best card to cheat in with this card is.
I'm with you also, just like 100% that like there are a bunch of those dumb demons. Not dumb because they're dumb because they're bad. They're just dumb because they always get printed like as a mythic rare in a set that costs 7 to 9. And they're always like really meaty and cool and do something really powerful. And I'm always like, they cost like 4 black or something. And so, but if this deck is already doing good things and you have them in there, I still just think though you don't want to play more than 1 or 2. And I think Gristlebrand is no doubt the number one you'd want to do. And then the question becomes, do you want to play Nils or some weird demon, or do you want to play Progenitus? Because like Progenitus is like way harder to get rid of if you get it on the battlefield, I feel like, and you can get it. So like, why not?
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
All right, so
next
on the red.
card. On the red. All right. Well, the first red card, and this is actually the only one of these that made it onto my list, which is 2 red, 4/4 Phyrexian Kavu, Defiler of Instinct. First strike, as an additional cost to cast red permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 red less. So basically, there's a cycle of cards, one in each color, that you can give every card of a color Phyrexian mana for one of its pips. So if you play a 1 red drop, it's free. If you play a 2 red, it's now a 2 red Phyrexian mana. And obviously that has powerful interactions. Of them, this is the one that I think has the best ability because they also all trigger, right? They'll have a trigger ability whenever you cast a spell of that color. This one is whenever you cast a red permanent spell, it deals 1 damage to any target. Which just in general is a powerful ability.
I mean, I think what's good about this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go.
I was going to say what's good about this because I actually, before I get into this card specifically, because I think it's pretty obvious what this card is good doing, but these cards by their nature are an interesting attempt from Wizards to try to give us Phyrexian mana. They're trying to give us something that feels like Phyrexian mana without just giving us Phyrexian mana, which is cool because Phyrexian mana is really popular and it's really good. And but it's
too funny though because Phyrexian mana is in the set.
Yeah. Yes.
Teferi has Phyrexian mana in his casting cost,
and so does a Johnny, right?
Sorry, I said a Johnny. What did I say?
You said Teferi.
I meant a Johnny. A Johnny has Phyrexian mana in his mana's cost.
Yeah, so they want to play with more ways to do it, and obviously we know now with the sets that are coming out down the line, it's very likely we're going to get more of that sort of thing. But these cards are interesting. So none of the rest of them had good enough trigger abilities or feel like they fit into a strategy well enough that the turn they came down, they would be able to do what you wanted them to. Because paying 4 as an investment for this card means that you have to be able to do something with the ability pretty much right away. Otherwise, it's not good enough. But obviously, think about this, guys. You cast this guy right away, and now all of a sudden I can cast Lightning Bolt for 2 life. Now all of a sudden I can cast Shard Volley for 2 life. I can cast any of my spells, Burst Lightning or whatever else I'm playing in Modern. It even means that my permanent spells, like my Ragavan or my Goblin Guide or my Swift Spear or my Channeler or whatever the thing I'm playing is, I can pay 2 life for, and it's going to turn into a gut. It's going to turn into a gut shot. I get to dome you for 1 by paying 2 life. Whatever is left in my hand.
And that's one of the reasons, because this one and the blue one are the 2 that I looked at. The problem with the blue one, it's a 5 mana card, which is just over the line of being really playable in the format. But 4 mana, there were 4 mana red 4/4s that have Modern playable. That's what Omnath is. And this in Murktide, you get to cast Unholy Heat, Lightning Bolt, Ragavan, and Dragon's Rage Channeler for free. You get to play Expressive Iteration for 1 blue.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
The biggest issue I have with this card, I think, is that the deck I want this in the most is the burn deck. And if I'm getting down a 4-drop, let's pretend this is in my opening hand, and I've got my Lightning Bolts and my Lava Spikes, my Searing Blazes, and my creatures, whatever, and my enchantment creature thing. You take 2, whatever that thing's called.
Eidolon.
I've got all those cards in my hand. The likelihood that by turn 4, if I hit my land drops and I curve out into this card, which is ideal, that I would hit my 4th land on turn 4, the likelihood that I would have more than 1 drop left in my hand at that point is pretty low, actually. And if you draw this later, it's even lower.
That's kind of why I don't like it as much in Burn as I like it into the grindier decks. I like it a lot more in the Rakdos midrange deck, right? Where you get Ragavan, you can play Croxas for 1 black. You get to get Terminate for 1 black, Kolaghan's Command for 1 and a black. And this is a Bloodbraid Elf mana cost, right? Because you get to, the turn you play it, you get to play Defiler of Instinct, 2 red, first strike 4/4. You now get to Lightning Bolt something for 4 if you want, because you can use the ping to kill something with the Lightning Bolt damage. Or you get to Kolaghan's Command and do 2, 1, or 3. It adds to the cards you're playing, and you get to cast some of these cards immediately. I agree. In Burn, this would be dope to have in play, but also 4 mana for a card in Burn doesn't make sense. 4 mana for a card in Rakdos midrange maybe makes sense. Like that's not out of the question for that deck. That deck is playing Agadeem's Awake, like not Agadeem's Awakening.
I think it's a cool idea. So the rest of the red cards that I see you have and I have are actually, there's only one we agree on, and the rest of them are all cards that either I don't have yours or you don't have mine. So let's do the thing where you and I essentially pitch each other on the card, so we can move through these kind of quickly. Go ahead first. The first card I see on your list that I don't have is the Phoenix Chick. What do you got?
I'm skip. Okay, I'll go for it. Oh, it's a 1 flying red haste. Phoenix can't block for a 1 mana 1/1 flying. Sorry. It's 1 mana for a 1/1 flying haste. Phoenix Chick can't block. When you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may pay red. If you do, return Phoenix Chicks from your graveyard to the battlefield and attacking with a +1/+1 counter on it. It's just an additional way in Dredge decks to get a creature that comes from your graveyard into play and to trigger prized amalgam when you're already attacking. It's a little bit win more with a relevant creature type. I mean, like Phoenix isn't out there as far as creature type tribal goes, and we can see that more. I do think that this is pretty loose compared to other options. You go to your next card.
My only comment on that, my 5-second comment, is I think it's a little underpowered at the power level that it comes in with two power. So that's why I looked at it. I just didn't put it down. Electrostatic Infantry is my next card. It's red 1 for a 1/2 trample dwarf wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a 1/1 counter on Electrostatic Infantry. The only reason I wrote this down is because I like Sprite Dragon. I've always liked Sprite Dragon, and I've always thought that card was cool. Instant and sorcery triggers that put counters on creatures that cost 2 or less are interesting. They're engine cards that get really big really fast in the right deck, and we haven't had that many of them. So the fact that the first one has flying and this has trample just makes me think redundancy. I don't see there's like a deck in Modern that's going to be good, but we didn't have this card yet, and the fact that it now one has trample and one has flying means that if you were to layer it up, I wouldn't be shocked if you saw somebody like 5-0 a daily with the deck that was doing that, because it is pretty powerful. What do you got for your next one?
Yeah, I think my answer to that is like, I think as a value cool deck that someone can build for under $20 or whatever, I think that's cute, like not a terrible deck idea. I think Ledger Shredder just is like better than both of those cards, which is going to be an issue with that card and those types of effects forever now. Just
play Shredder though in the deck though, like you'd have 12 of them. Like you would just, that's what you would do.
I think then why not just play Ragavan and Merc? Like you're getting into a land of,
yeah, that's fair. So it's close.
Like if you're trying to not spend money, I get it. Ledger Shredder is $20 a pop, so then you get into that. My last card here is Twinferno. 1 red instant, choose 1. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy, or target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. So there's the red and a 1 ferocious. It gets double strike and trample if they have ferocious card that like kind of created a deck around it. Now this does something similar to that. Now it doesn't give trample, but what it does do is it lets you in those red green stompy decks that people love playing. That once again, this is much more in the value train. If you maybe have a creature that giving them double strike isn't good enough, sometimes just become immensing ×2 is going to do a lot of, getting the double up on that is going to be really powerful. Being able to put it on 2 creatures, like maybe you have 2 creatures in play, you have one become immense and you have this, and giving your 1 creature double strike isn't going to kill them, but giving your 2 creatures become immense does get the damage you need into it. So those style of decks, obviously much more of a value oriented side of things, but this is so versatile in what those decks are trying to do and lets you double up on some really powerful pump spell effects that I think it's a non-irrelevant card for those decks.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty fair point. I've always Temur Battle Rage is the card we were thinking of. I just remembered it.
Thank you.
And yes, I think the only other thing with this card that when I thought of was like the old Death Shadow decks played this card and they don't anymore. But the idea that this can either double strike a creature in your deck or it can just be like, I pay 2 to make my lightning bolt deal 6 is like,
no, I think
probably
like Temur Battle Rage stopped seeing playing those because they became much more of like a controlled tempo deck that just like a 13/13 was good enough, but this could be good in those decks where Temur Battle Rage isn't, because the half the time you double strike you just get your opponent like, oh yeah, I'm at 12, I can take 6 damage from this Death Shadow and be able to stabilize later, and you'll just be like, no, you lose.
Yeah.
And then the other half of the time when that's not a relevant ability, you can just be like, oh, for 5 mana on turn 5, I double cast my Colligan's command, and now I double, I get 2 of my Death Shadows back from my graveyard and kill your 2 creatures, or you discard your last 2 cards. Like being able to, in a spell-based tempo deck, that has a threat like Death Shadow to be able to just like outright win the game as a combo style. I think this card's powerful in those decks too. Like playing this as a 1-of in Death Shadow seems super spicy and like minimal cost to the pilot.
I had the same thought when I looked at it, which is like the comp obviously was Battle Rage, and I felt like they hadn't played it in so long. That's why I skipped it. My last two here in red are going to be quick. One of those Rada's Firebrand, red 1 for a 3/1 human warrior. When Rada's Firebrand attacks, target creature defending player controls with power less than Rada's power can't block this turn. But it has Domain, red 5. It gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it costs 1 less to cast to activate for each land type. So in that same Domain sort of zoo idea we were talking about, what this is a 2-mana 3/1 that, when it attacks, target creature defending player controls with power less than 3, just on its face cost, can't block. So it curves out well, but then if you go into that zoo style, like if your turn 1 is Nacatl in the Domain 5 land deck, that means that pretty quickly, like by the time this thing is attacking, if your deck is built correctly, that means on turn 3 for a single red, you get to pay 1 red and make this thing into a 5/3. Very few decks, other than pretty much Murktide, are going to have anything that can block a 5/3 on turn 3. And look, again, it can get bolted. You're spending mana to pump it. It's probably not good enough. It just came to mind for me when I was thinking how easy it is to hit 5 colors now. Like this definitely is a pretty pushed card.
So in your defense, there's the new, I'm trying to look it up. There's the new red-green Kavu from Modern Horizons 2 that has Domain as well, and is I think like a 4/4. And when it attacks, you get to, I think you either get to loot or you get to do one other ability. Oh, sorry, yeah, okay. So territorial Kavu, red and a green, Kavu Domain. Its power and toughness is equal to Domain. And then whenever it attacks, choose one, discard a card. If you do, draw a card, exile up to 1 card from target graveyard. So like incidental guard 8 or a loot effect. But I think these two cards together do start building a Domain Zoo like build. Now I don't know, like there really needs to figure out how many benefits are to playing that play style, but that's been a deck in previous standard formats or previous formats in history. And both of these cards together in Modern do create some pretty powerful 2-mana, beefy, easy to get damage in, value-oriented decks.
Agreed. So the last 2 cards we have in this category, and we'll be quick about one, and then we'll end on the other because it's actually good. I have one other red card. It's a Goblin, and it's just like an interesting card. And I only put it in here because I was thinking about what else does this. And it's red 1. It's a Goblin Druid 2/2 called Sprouting Goblin. When Sprouting Goblin enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, search your library for a land card with a basic land type, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. The kicker is 1. That ability is fine. I don't know how many Goblin decks are ever going to play green. The more important thing is that for red and tap, sacrifice a land, draw a card. So the only reason I put this down was because I was like, how many bears that are goblins have the built-in ability of red and 1 tap, sack a land, draw a card? That's like such incidental value in what is a basically mono red goblin card. Like every goblin deck in history, when they stall out, would love to be able to sack a mountain for 1 red and draw a card. That's like everything those decks have ever wanted when they get into that top end range. And so I don't even care about the kicker. I was just sort of thinking like, it's hard because how do you justify making a slot for this card just for that reason? Which is probably why it's just like a gobbledygook pitch. But I was thinking I hadn't seen this before, and it's a cool value top end ability for a goblin. That's all.
I think Goblin decks both can play this as a 1-of because they have tutors for it and just is like a value engine. It's great with Snoop in the sense that like it's an activated ability. So if you want it, Snoop can use it while it's on top of the deck. Now you just draw it, but like that's not the worst thing on the planet. And it is a way in the late game, if you've been interacted with, to get rid of some of the lands that you've gotten to be able to get to the combos you need. Also in that deck, the fact that Snoop just wants the right card to be on top. Sometimes you just have the wrong card on top, and you can activate this to manipulate the top of your deck. That does bring us into the next card, because I do think that this is one of the speaking of goblins.
Yeah, agreed.
Runevelt Hordemaster, 1 and a red goblin warrior, 1/1. Other goblin creatures you control get +1/+1. When Runevelt Hordemaster or another goblin you control dies, exile the top card of your library. If it's a goblin creature card, you may cast that card until end of turn. This does dumb things with previous preview card of the cast, Skirt Prospector, being able to use that as a sack outlet to go off, and getting to draw 2 cards a turn off of it is kind of a bonkers ability. Not to mention just like blocks get a lot harder because if something dies, you get to draw something off of it. Like this is like when we say these lords are pushed, like the fact that the cleric one is so good that we're talking about playing it, even though like clerics is a fake tribe. Like the red and the blue one, which like the green one, the elf one, the elf, goblin, and merfolk one, those are classically already good decks in modern, and these are all bonkers in them.
They're
we haven't
all
gone to the green one yet.
Pick out something else in the same slot. That's what's
yeah,
wild.
like I think there's an argument on all 3 of them that they are the best, if not one of the best lord of those tribes of all time.
Yeah, agreed. I think this card is extremely good. Goblins has always been a fringe modern deck. It's weird that no matter how many good cards it gets, it's never been able to break into the tier 1 of modern. Like it's always had the like that like pedigree of like, God, these cards are good. And maybe this card does it because like now between Snoop and Prospector and like Kiki and all the things that deck can do, maybe this just pushes it over the top because it does feel like redundancy and mono red. Like, but yeah, I mean, whatever we're saying, it's just very good.
Remember the Fecundity deck? This is Fecundity on a red creature, on a goblin. Like there was a goblin deck that was playing Fecundity, which lets each player, if a creature they controls dies, they draw a card. Now the goblin deck just gets a one-sided Fecundity on their side with Skirt Prospector and can kind of just win the game off of it. Not to mention add Snoop to the pile where you just draw into your Kiki Jiki on top and go infinite, right? Like there's so many powerful things you can do with this. And it's when it's not doing that, it's a lord that makes like this plus the 2 mana make a 1/1 goblin. It's a 1/1 goblin, and then it dies because it has echo, and then when it dies, you make an additional 1/1 goblin. Like that's 3. If you have a sack outlet, that's make 3 red mana, draw 3 cards for 2 mana.
Yeah,
so inherently it's make 3 mana. It's make 1 mana and draw 3 cards for free.
I'm definitely pretty impressed by it. It'll be interesting to see. Sometimes we see cards that on the face look good like this, and then they don't end up showing up as much as we'd expect for some reason. And my gut kind of tells me that's going to be the case here. Not because I don't think it's powerful. I don't know why. For some reason, I just don't think it's going to break through.
Because you hate goblins. I'm going to tell all our goblins podcast fans.
How good was Snoop? Snoop was so good. Like they keep. I mean, Prospector. Like they've given us so many tools that should have pushed it. And like anyway, we'll see. So let's get into green, and we're going to go straight into green into the very same conversation, which is Leaf Crown Visionary. You mentioned it a second ago. It's green for a 1/1. Other elves you control get +1/+1. Elf Druid. Whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay 1 green if you do draw cards. So this is the one that for me, like when I read it, I was like, wait, what? You're telling me that like the old elf decks that wanted to be able to cast Glimpse of Nature because legacy Glimpse decks were good couldn't do that because that card is banned. But now you just printed us an elf lord for green that does that?
Tutorable, collected companyable, protectable green creature that does that. Yes, they did that.
You do have to pay 1. So it's not like it doesn't really do that, but like in terms of the upside of what this card is doing otherwise, it's pretty bonkers. I mean, this plays into every aspect of what the elves deck does, right? Like it's allowing you to be aggressive, it's allowing you to just beat down, but it's also allowing you to have card advantage, and if you stall out, this is the best, I think. I think this is even 1 hair better than the Merfolk. It's this.
Oh, I know. If I'm ranking them, I would say it's the goblin and then the merfolk and then the elf. Actually, the problem with the elf, and it's a small problem, is that it is in content. It's in content. It's still very good, but there is a contentiousness with it, right? Where like, when do you activate your Elvish Archdruid? Because you want to get as many goblins into play, but you also want to save the mana from the Elvish Archdruid to be able to trigger the draw card effect. So it's a little bit clunky in that regard. It's still good. You're still going to draw like 3 cards a turn off of it, and there's going to eventually be a turn where you just like go bonkers. In Elves and Legacy, this card's bonkers. Like I don't even, because there you get to play with all of the like Wireward Symbiote, untap your elf cards that make this card insane, where you get to like tap Elvish Archdruid, play a bunch of elves, untap, etc. It does make me want to think about playing with the 4 mana all green spells get flash elf.
Yes, Yeva, sure.
so that you can like respond to the triggers and then like have these triggers on the stack and then tap Elvish Archdruid once you have 4 elves in play, and then you get to make the 4 mana that you then get to pay to spend on the triggers themselves, right? Like that gives like a weird.
I would agree. That's pretty interesting. That's pretty good.
Or just Collected Company with is really good, right? Because you can Collected Company. If this isn't playing Elvish Archdruid and playing you on tap, already you're ahead. You play Collected Company, you get 2 elves into play. They put the trigger on the stack for this into play, but then you can tap Elvish Archdruid and you get to tap it for the 2 elves in play. I think that's one of the really strong plays with it for sure. Because the next one is Llanowar Stalker. Green 1/1 elf warrior. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Now, this is a green variant for elves of the goblin card that's been honestly like a staple of the goblin decks in Modern, basically, since Modern has existed. Now, that deck has never been tiered 1, but has always been just under the radar, and especially like a very easy value entry into the format. As we just said, this deck is now looking for a lot of ways to get cheap, inexpensive elves that can then chain into card draw effects, as well as turning your mana ramp up. This is a pretty aggressive threat then. It plays really well also with some of the token makers in elves, where you're making like 2 elves per card a turn, making this a 3/1 for 1, which is obviously very good. I do think power level wise, the format has gotten a little past this card, but I think it does have potential, especially like one way this is good is that there is a version of these elf decks that are playing like 12 cards a turn and then they don't do anything. And this card could just be like, oh no, I swing for 12.
My issue with this card when I looked at it was it has no evasion. So it's like if you're around this card and you're centered around this card being like the big haymaker based on your big turn, like you may be drawing a lot of cards and getting a lot of creatures in play. But if your plan is to like then attack for 12, probably I exile it or block it. And like a lot of the setup that just means that you had to cut a spot in your deck to make room for this card. So now you've attacked with something that I answered, and now you have to reset the next turn and do an Elves turn, which is also very good, but Modern's very good. So I just thought this card, it just needed to have like another element or something, which is crazy to say because this feels like a Modern Horizons level power of card.
Yeah. I agree. I think like the big cost is the opportunity cost, right? Like this card is going to have turns where it's amazing, but you have to have it in your deck for it to be there. Exactly. I think them removing it, good. If I'm in an elf deck and someone is removing my 1/1 for 1, and not Elvish Archdruid or this Lord or Azuri or whatever, like,
yeah, it's a good point.
Fine.
My next card I've got, and this is one we were talking about a second ago, and this is actually interesting. I had to double check this. Gaia's Might. This card has actually not been legal in Modern. It is the classic pump spell for Domain. It's green instant. Target creature gets +1/+1 for each land type you control. Basic land type. So what this is if you are playing it in the deck that it should be played in, it's 1 green instant speed. Target creature gets +5/+5 till end of turn. So like, classically, when this was printed, and this is what's interesting about the whole conversation surrounding Domain, in Standard, there was no such thing back then as a 5-color deck that could get all colors on turn 2. We had dual lands, but we didn't have fetch lands yet. Invasion's before Onslaught, guys. So, like, when you look back at when this was printed and how Domain was treated versus how it is now, we have the ability for this to be pretty consistently, without much effort, 1 green +5/+5 for instant speed. Now, Might of Old Krosa plays 1 green for +4/+4 in their main phase. There's nothing in Infect that can give you this +5/+5 for 1 without a condition. Granted, like Become Immense is big, but it's a different condition. This can play into a Zoo deck if that Zoo deck we were talking about exists pretty easily. This can just be like +5/+5 for 1, like anytime you want it to be, which is powerful. Or, and this is the one I was the most curious about, how hard would it be for an Infect deck to become 5 colors? How hard would Infect have to work to go into a fetch land mana base instead of its classic mana base to be 5 colors, where Gaia's Might for 1 green could just be a 4 of in the deck, and now Infect just doubled. They can literally take half your life with 1 spell. That's the thing when I read this where I was like, wow, I can't believe this has not been printed into a standard set since freaking Plane Shift. That was like 2001. Like, it was 21 years ago. So Gaia's Might to me was a card that I was like, maybe I'm deluded, but I think the extra point of damage for the extra 1 less point of mana compared to Phyto Burst makes this actually Sneakily really good.
Yeah, I'm very fascinated to see if we get Infect back. Like, does Phyrexia have Infect? Because I think that set's going to be, I think we're going to go to Phyrexia, and that set's going to be like a regular set we visit somewhere, but it's from the perspective of Phyrexians just having a good time. Like, we're just going to go to the plane of Phyrexia as if that's like a normal place to exist before the war starts or whatever. And does that have Infect on it, or do we not get it until the aftermath? Like, it's going to be an interesting. And then if we do get it, do we get a library of reasons to be in 5 colors in Infect, right? Because right now, at most, you want to be in 3. White and red are really not good. But if Elish Norn is the main character doing it, getting into the 5 color world starts to become a lot more interesting.
Well, let me put it to you this way for a second. So let's just say turn 1, fetch land, you get a green plus land into play. You play your Glistener Elf, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Turn 2, I attack the Glistener Elf. My green thing gives me, let's say, Might of Old Crosa or, Vines or something, right? It's like, not Vines, the other one, Groundswell. So now I've done 5 Infect to you. So now you've taken 5 Infect. And I've had 1 extra mana open on that turn for my counterspell. And then on turn 3, I play my 3rd land, and I have all 5 colors because of fetches. And now all I have to do is cast a Gaia's Might, and I kill you. And I have not 1, but 2 extra mana open for interaction. I can literally Vines and Spell Pierce you while still casting Gaia's Might to kill you on turn 3.
So the real question then is like, is this better than the landfall one? Right? Like,
that's Groundswell that I was just talking about. I don't think there's any chance you'd cut both. I think you'd cut Might of Old Crosa because you don't ever have to play a sorcery speed +4/+4. Your whole deck is based on fetch land, so Groundswell is awesome. Vines is great because it's going to give you interaction and plus, and this plus
sure.
like I think that deck probably just fixes its mana base to be a 5 color fetch shock mana base, and I think Gaia's Might's a 4 of. I just think it's the best. We haven't had a +5/+5 for 1 that was actually castable in that deck until now.
Okay.
So
next card, Tear Asunder, 1 green instant, kicker, 1 black, exile target artifact or enchantment. If the spell is kicked, exile target non-land permanent spell instead. This is similar to the blue spell we were talking about, where it goes from generically already playable, but probably just below the power level of modern playable spell, to add black and an amount of mana, and now you're playing with a 4 mana black kill anything you want spell. I think that if we get to the point where having a artifact enchantment removal spell main deck is worth it, this starts becoming really interesting to look at. I think it's just below the power level to be modern playable, but I think it's close.
When I read it, I had the same sort of feeling, which is like there's more modal cards that have been printed now the last few years because there's much more of an understanding that you need to have that ability to answer with a naturalize effect. So, but I think this card falls into that same category of like cool early, kicker late, interesting. It just doesn't feel like it's going to be better than the other things that will exist, that have existed. Like to get the full value of this, you're paying 4 mana. When are you really going to want to pay 4 mana for that effect? It feels like there's something could do a similar version of that effect for less mana and just not be as cheap, and you'd be okay with it. Which is why I think this card is like probably a standard card. I don't think it's a modern card.
Sure. All right. Next card, Urberg Lurgorf. Lurgorf, 1 green Lurgorf creature, kicker, blue and or black. As it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards for each time it was kicked. So it can mill up to 6 cards if you pay for 4 mana, or it's just a 2 mana enters the battlefield. It enters the battlefield with power is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. Now, that +1 is a big deal because previous creatures in the format that did this were XXs. So they would just die if you had no creatures in your graveyard. So you always had to kind of hold on to them until late game. Here, you can just play this on turn 1 or turn 2, and then it scales up as it gets later. And it can get very big. Like where a Tarmogoyf caps out at an 8/9, I've now already, in the few games I've played on Arena, faced against this as a 12/12. It scales up really quickly. And that also helps that it scales up really quickly if you play it for 3 and you mill 3 cards, or you play it for 4 and you mill for 6. Self-milling for that amount scales it up really quickly.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, it like is just going to be decent. Like scaling this. I mean, obviously we're now talking about 4-color, but scaling a Dragon Rage channeler into this, and then just like milling creatures or Ledger Shredder in this together, it can get big really quickly.
My thought with this card when I read it was like, I think it's cool. It feels like a standard card to me. It feels like a card that will be good in a standard format where you're playing heavy creatures, and this can be a really good threat. It doesn't feel like it competes with the threats in Modern, because to get the max value out of it, you're spending 3 or 4 mana versus like casting it on its. No, I know, but I'm saying, but if you cast it on its own, it's just a Lagoif. It's a 2-mana Lagoif, which it's an X1 Lagoif, but it's still just a 2-mana Lagoif, which like I just don't see the deck. Like, okay, you're playing Thought Scour on turn 1 or something, right? Like some card or Stitcher Supplier. That's probably the better card you'd play with this, where like it's a creature and it also mills you. Like, it doesn't feel like a card unless you're just all creatures. Like, where...
Well, but that deck exists, right? Like, this seeing play in a Hollow One, Vengevine-esque, not Hollow One, because that's a discard deck, which we didn't speak about with Raven Man, by the way, but that's a thing. But a Vengevine-based, like, what the Hogak deck was, like, this seeing play in the Hogak shell, but instead of Hogak, you're playing this. Like, that's a format deck, and this card is good in that deck, especially because even doing the self-mill off of the chain, this gets
Street
really
Wraith
big.
is legal. Street Wraith's legal, which is interesting with this card. Like, it does mean you can take the Hollow One style Street Wraith thing, and this on turn 2, even if you just are... there's something here. I think this is underpowered. That's why I didn't put it on my list, but I hear what you're saying.
Every card we've named is really good with this card, and they're all Modern playable, right? And that doesn't even get to the point that, like, I think this card is just playable in Jund. I think you play this I think in some decks this is better than Tarmogoyf. If you're more on a aggressive creature deck base, if you're not trying to get 7 different card types, so you're just playing like Dragon Rage, not even Dragon Rage Channeler, but like 1-drop into 2-drop into 3-drop. This guy gets really big, and then late game scales, right? Like the early game you play as a 2-drop. On turn 6, if you draw it, you get to draw 3 cards if you're playing with any type of graveyard interaction. I think like it's more valuable than you're giving it credit for, especially because I've now played against it. It gets big. It gets big really quickly.
You could be right, and also like this is classically the kind of card that would show up in your Highlander deck, and I'd be so mad about that I like would never play. So it's like literally exactly our disagreement when it comes to Magic.
You don't emotionally understand why Tarmogoyf is good or has ever been good. Like, even when it's the best creature on Modern, you're like, that doesn't make sense. That card's bad. I'm gonna trade that for $7 for Microcent Lattice, or what? Not Microcent Lattice. What was the card?
We're almost into our gold and artifact and lands, which will close out the show here. These last 2 cards, one of which I thought you'd have on here, the other one is just a card I think is cool. I'll give you the quick pitch. You can turn your nose up if you want. Quirion Beastcaller is a card that I wrote down, which is green 1 for a 2/2. Whenever you cast a creature spell, put a 1/1 counter on Quirion Beastcaller. It's a Dryad Warrior. Whenever Quirion Beastcaller dies, distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control, where X is the number of counters on the Beastcaller. So, like, the only reason I thought this card was cool was because if you're playing the creature-heavy green, mono green Leatherback Baloth deck, like, as a bear...
Does that deck exist still?
It's a budget deck. I mean, that's an example of a deck. My point is, like, there aren't that many creatures that when they die allow you to distribute without being modular, not only on one creature, but amongst all your creatures, right? Like, if this comes out on turn 2 and you like, and I do understand like Solitude and things like that make that useless, but it just, to me, I read it and I was like, it's a cool card. It's a cool card. I don't think there's a deck for it. I wanted to point it out because I hadn't seen it before. The other card that I wrote down was Threats Undetected. I figured you probably looked at this already. Green 2 sorcery. Search your library for up to 4 creature cards with different powers. Reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Shuffle the cards into your library. Put the rest into your hand.
That last part is why I don't think it's Modern playable. Actually, 2 parts. It's a sorcery, as well as you shuffling them into your deck and not putting them into your graveyard.
I'm I'm not gonna like pretend that I am too proud to realize that it didn't have the put them in your graveyard effect, so we can just move on.
You're not alone. There are a lot of people like, whoa, this card's dope. Never mind.
This card's not good. Never mind.
It's close. It's cool. It's going to be really fun to play if you ever get to play it, but it's not modern. I don't think it's modern playable. Let's get into the world of gold.
Well, this card's sweet. This card's really good. Yeah.
First card I have is Belmore Battle Mage Captain, blue red bird wizard flying. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. 1/3. It is probably just below power level. I mean, there's definitely a prowess deck that we're talking about that this plays really well into. It plays really well into token prowess decks. The thing I like about it is that it gives trample. So like if you're playing the Phoenix, get something that the Djinn that we talked about, like this into the Djinn is actually in itself really cool because it does allow you to scale up and give that creature trample. Right now, this thing is flying and trample is going to get damage and guaranteed. Not to mention, it now also pumps your whole team. If you have a wide squad, it goes really well with it. It's really versatile for what it's doing. It might, and it's cheap. It's two mana. Plus, it's legendary. Like there's a lot of different tribal words on it, including bird, wizard, and legendary creature.
This card to me is so interesting because remember Adelaide is the Cinder Wind, the red one blue. This to me reads as like that Adelaide wasn't good enough. We're gonna make a better Adelaide now. Like that's what this reads to me as. Like it's so much more playable. I really liked Adelaide. I was really excited about that card when it came out, but it costing 3 just meant that like you just weren't gonna really have what you needed. And this is like sort of all of the things that card wanted to be. It's also a wizard, so it's like actually in the same class, but it makes your creatures, not your wizards, get plus. I think this card's really good. It's weird, as you said, as a modern card. Like, can I build a deck around this that I believe in? That's a little harder, but it is just a 2-mana 1/3 flyer already on its own that gets better every spell you play. So it's like there's so many spell cards that exist. There's so many prowess cards. There's so many good cantrips that cost 1 now that it does make me feel like in some ways that this card might be actually the key to a strategy, like a blue-red spell strategy that's not based on Murktide or Phoenix. That's just based on like the good cards and spells. Might be good enough where you can just play this. I'm not sure, but I wrote it down.
I mean, there's an argument to play this as a one-of in Murktide anyways, right? Like giving Murktide trample, giving... Like I agree with you. Like giving Dragon Rage Channeler trample and getting Dragon Rage Channeler to be a 4/4 or a 5/5 when it's attacking. Getting Ragavan +1/+0, so it's a 5/5. So you're gonna guarantee that you hit with the Ragavan to like get your treasure and get a spell off of it. Like there's a lot of like this scales well into that deck and like that deck is very good at making big things that are easy to get in front of, and this makes all those big things get through with minimal effort and is fine on its own. Playing this playing this on turn 2 and just like having spells up and playing like the prowess game plan in the meantime is like not bad. Yeah, I agree.
This card for sure stuck out to me. My next card is not on your list, so I'm going to jump in with it here. My next card is Jhoira, Ageless Innovator. Now there is one reason and one reason only this card is being talked about on this podcast. It is red, blue, for a 2/3 legendary creature, human artificer. Tap, put 2 ingenuity counters on Jhoira, Ageless Innovator. Then you may put an artifact card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield, where X is the number of ingenuity counters on Jhoira. So Alex, when you tap a Jhoira and you put 2 counters on a Jhoira and you put an artifact card with CMC X, which is 2 or less on the battlefield, what creature comes to mind for you?
Mercipurian.
Yes, sir. It's our newest entry. I'm a little bummed that Jhoira doesn't have haste. I sort of feel like if they wanted to push this, they could have given it haste, and you could have had like cool 2 mana, 2/3 legendary that taps and like plays Mind Stone or plays whatever thing you're gonna do. Like, I don't think it would have been that bananas. I think it would have been good, but I don't think
it probably would have needed to have been 1 ingenuity counter if she had haste. Here's right, like instead of 2, it's 1. And
I know what you're gonna say. It's the Wizards is scared of Mercipurian, right? That's what you're gonna say. They don't want to.
Yes, that's what it is. No, actually, I kind of should have had this on my list because I think there's so like this is Aether Vial, but for artifacts and artifact creatures. So A, if you want to have redundancy on your Aether Vials and play 8 of them, she lets you do that. B, she does let you, in a way that is uncounterable, on turn 4, get in any 4-drop for free.
Yeah.
Right? Any 4, like there's I think there's more to this card than I think it's being given credit for. I don't know if it's modern playable because she's really fragile, but I do think that there's some cool shenanigans you can do that are definitely not unviable.
She's fragile and she's slow. That's the issues. They're both things are
but
very
she's 2 mana. So you play her in turn 2. She blocks Ragavan all day.
But she's 2 mana 2/3 that does nothing. She's a literal 2 mana 2/3 spell that you are playing. It's legendary. So if you want to be able to hit this on turn 2, you're playing too many of them and it dies to lightning bolt. Like it's a really slow, really fragile spell. I also have another one that's not on your list here, so I'm going to jump to it because it's another weird one. It's Sten Paranoid Partisan, which is blue-white for a 2/2 legendary creature human wizard. As Sten Paranoid Partisan enters the battlefield, choose a card other than creature or land type. Spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. And then it has a blue-white 1 exile Sten, return to the battlefield under its controller's control at the beginning of the next end step. So I wrote this down for one reason, and that's because years ago on this podcast, I had been trying to build this deck. And we actually talked about it a bit earlier tonight with Goblin Electromancer. I'm not sure if you remember this deck, but it was 4 Electromancers. You would play, they printed Baral, so you'd play a couple Barals, but it was annoying because you didn't want to play legendary creatures in multiples of 4. And you played all of these spells that had flashback with at least 1 colorless in the casting cost. So Lingering Souls was like the key spell. So you'd go like Electromancer turn 2, and then on turn 3 you'd go Souls, flashback Souls. So you'd that was like when I thought of the deck, that was like the cool idea, was you could like get 4 tokens on turn 3, which is not that powerful, but it was like cool. And Baral was the best option as the other ones, but he was legendary. So now that you have this card, you're already playing 4 colors. You could play some Baral and some of this card, and this card has a better ability in his blink ability to save himself. I only wrote it down because I was like, if you built the deck correctly, there's probably more flashback cards. There's probably more cards that are doing the same sort of thing now. I think this is a strategy that redundancy eventually will make good, because like the Souls thing is cute, but it's also sort of cool. Like it's not powerful. Like spending your turn 3 to get 4 tokens is not like horrible, especially if you have anything that takes advantage of tokens or casting spells, where you're getting 2 spells out of it. The old version of the deck played Guide on turn 1. So I wrote him down just because I was like, now we have another version that is not Curious Homunculus, and I just thought it'd be cool to mention because it was an old deck of mine. That's enough of that.
Cool. Yeah, fair. I think I like how its abilities work together. It's really cute. It's the right mana cost to be something that's powerful, and there isn't this in white, so I think that could be really, really cool. The next card on my list is in the World of Feather, and the 5 mana one that's less exciting. A Ivy Gleefill Spell Thief, blue-green fairy rogue, 2/1 flying, which decent rate. Whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy, you may copy that spell. The copy targets Ivy. So any opponent spell that they play that they want to target one of their creatures with, or one of your other creatures with, you can copy it, be it a pump spell or a protection spell, etc. I think in modern it ends up being a little bit underpowered, but maybe an interesting sideboard spell, because it does copy spells, not instants and sorceries. So like bringing this in a blue-green deck against Boggles is like really funny to me, and almost worth doing if that was like, if you're at an FNM and you have a player that's like the deck that they play, this is such a sick tech card to have in your blue-green deck to bring in against them as just a like fun hate card. I think that it also, like, there's strategies around it too, right? Where you get to like anything that target creature draws a card that you target one of your other creatures with, Ivy gets to copy it, so you get to make it draw 2 cards. So all of those spells get a lot better. But I think the funniest one to me is just having it as a Boggle sideboard card for FNM players who like really want to get that one player who always kills them with Boggles.
The only thing I thought of when I thought of this card was Feather, and I was like, it's like red, white or something, or white, red, whatever it is. It was like a
Feather is, yeah.
was like very different, so I couldn't quite wrap my head around it, so I skipped it. My next card here was Vohar Vodalian Desecrator, which is black blue for a 1/2 legendary creature, Phyrexian Merfolk Wizard. By the way, shout out to all of the Phyrexian and then 2 subtypes. It's a cool idea of like infected, like, you know, they've been completed and turned. I think it's cool. The 2 abilities are tap, draw a card, then discard a card. If you discard an instant or sorcery this way, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. And then it has 2 colorless, sacrifice Vohar. You may cast target instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard this turn. If that spell would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead, activate only as a sorcery. This card's good for a couple things. Number one, it's really good for EDH. It's going to be a very good card in Commander. Like, this is one of the best commanders printed in a long time. It literally is built for combo wins. But the thing is, those combo wins that are good
not
in
as good
CDH,
as Kess.
This is better than Kess for CDH. Because you can, this just literally wins with, no, this on its own wins with Consultation and Oracle. Like, you can.
So does Kess.
This costs
They
2.
do the same thing. No, it costs 4. It's just 2 over 2 turns.
I mean, come
versus
on.
1 over 1 turn.
You're a Magic player. You know that 2 over 2 turns is better than 4. Don't even Hollywood.
Yeah, but I also get red, which means I get
okay, that's fair.
Breach and Jessica's Will, and
I'm tangoing with an expert here. Point being, I think this card is cool and interesting, and
I think it's very good. I think it's better than Sig for sure.
Okay. Low blow. I spent $700 on the foil. I did not. How good Vohard is in Modern is debatable, but I do think, like, Eric texted me earlier and he was like, I'm looking through my decks and I'm going to cut Snapcaster from the Wizards deck. And he was like, I'm going to add Vohar. And it's like, it's interesting how, I think he's wrong, just for the record. But it's interesting how, like, they keep printing cards that are so good, incidentally, that are like not even like flagship cards. They're just good cards. It starts to invalidate the power of older cards. This card is really good. There's a lot going on with this card, and it's not even trying very hard. This is like a kind of shrug of your shoulders, like
that,
uncommon.
Like part of the weird thing in the singleton format that cut for me is, like, I would want redundancy, right? I want both of these cards in that deck, not one or the other. And I do think there's things that these do differently, right? Looting is really good, and being able to loot and then take advantage of it is really good. So yeah, this card's really cool.
Yeah, one of my favorite for sure. I think the problem with this and the fairy, and that you brought it up with Joyra, is that the 2 mana legendary creatures that are built around me get a lot worse because they're legendary. Like, this is where the legendary feature. One of the reasons they're pushed is because they're legendary, you can't have 2 of them in play at the same time. Correct. It almost feels like for the first time in a while that's been relevant. And like, one of the reasons I like Balmor is that Balmor can go into decks as a 1/of. Me playing that in Murktide is great as just a 1/of cool draw that I can dig for. And if you guys are, like, at all aware of our last 2 years, it's clear that Alex has totally converted me to enjoying Commander, because I look at cards now and I, like, see them and I'm like, this is at least, like, interesting, and I, like, justify talking about it on the show now because I'm like, that card as a commander is very good. Vohar is really good, like, super powerful, and that's
don't worry, fans. I'm now going to get Ben into Pioneer. So
okay. So our next couple cards here, I think we're just about done with the gold cards left. I've only got one.
I'm done with gold cards. So yeah,
last one for me. This is one you and I were talking about in the pre-show a little bit, and I think this is a fringe modern card, but the only reason I bring this up is because the card that I see this as most interesting with was originally the interesting 4/of in a modern GP winning deck, and that was the Scred deck. So this card is Black-Red 1, Rivez of the Claw, legendary creature Viashino Warlock, Menace, 3/3. Abilities are tap, add 2 mana and any combination of colors. Spend this mana only to cast dragon creature spells. Only once during each of your turns, you may cast a dragon creature spell from your graveyard. Whenever you cast a dragon creature spell from your graveyard, it gains, when this creature dies, exile it. So the card I mentioned was Sarkhan, the red 2 Planeswalker. It was from, like, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. Its top ability was reverse loot, rummage, I guess it's called. The minus was create mana. It was like add 1 or 2 to make dragons. It's just a specific planeswalker made to make a dragon tribal deck, basically. And this is a 3-mana creature that already is just a drag. It's already a 3-mana 3/3 with menace that like fits the curve, but then has a massive acceleration. I don't think there's a dragon tribal deck in Modern. Like, honestly, like there could be, but I don't think I would sell you on one right now. But the fact that other card exists and this card just got printed means you could kind of take the same strategy that worked back then, and you might be able to insert this in and like tap 3 on turn 3 to untap, play land, cast 6, drop dragon. That's pretty good acceleration. I mean, that's a pretty strong thing, especially considering once during each turn you can cast a dragon from the graveyard. Like, you could have just like discarded a 6-mana dragon early in the game, and then on turn 4 you just cast it off this card. I don't know. I think that the fact that it accelerates and also utilizes the graveyard to me means if you got real clever with a dragons deck, I think it might work. Maybe.
I think a 3-mana tap for 2-mana creature wouldn't see play in Modern by itself. I think a 3-mana you get to cast dragons from your graveyard, depending on what dragons get printed, could see play. So the first ability makes it a little bit more relevant. The fact that it's a 3/3 is what hurts it the most for me. Just like lightning bolt is going to murder this thing every single time, and there is no like 1 mana or 0 mana dragons. Like the reason Kess, who doesn't see any Modern play, works or Snapcaster Mage works is because you can pay 1-drops and 2-drops off of it, right? And this you have to untap with it no matter what, right? Like Lurrus works because you can play 0-drop artifacts or 1-drop artifacts off of it. It's limited in that sense. But if there's ever a 2-mana 1-mana dragon that's like bonkers to rebuy, or like a dragon tribal enchantment that you can sacrifice, sick. I'm on artifacts unless you got another gold card.
No, I'm good to go. Yeah.
All right, so the first card, and this is the MacGuffin of this set. This is the thing Karn was searching for to help stop the Phyrexians. It's Karn's Silex. 3 mana for a legendary artifact. Karn Silex enters the battlefield tapped. Players can't gain life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. And then you may pay X and tap it to destroy each non-land permanent with value X or less, activate only as a sorcery. So it's a Niv's Disc meets Pernicious Deed variant, which is pretty cool. There's many ways to get this into play. So like straight out the gate, I'm thinking Tron, because this is like a really cool sideboard card for Tron that like lets them keep their good cards while eating all of their opponent's cards a turn later, with the added ability that this turns off fetch lands.
I mean, it's like the super Nivernal's Disc, right? Like that's what this card is. It's like a play on a lot of. I think you just said that, but a lot of the cards from the old sets, the early sets in Magic, come back in these Dominaria sets. Like that's kind of the theme. And one thing I do think is so cool, by the way, about these sets is like I know Gavin Verhey, who's a friend of ours, who works there and designs cards, and who works with a lot of these classic designers. Like he's a huge Invasion guy, massive, right? And it's very cool to see the old classic cards get callbacks. And it's hard to read this card and not immediately think about the disc. Like it does feel like that's what this is a throwback to, but this is pretty clearly better than disc, I think, right?
No, well, it's different, right? 3 mana means it comes down a turn earlier than disc does. But disc, when you untap with it for 1 mana, destroys everything. But that means all of your stuff. This, you can target which the converted mana cost you're hitting to. That's why I think it's closer to me almost to Pernicious Deed than disc. It has the negative effect of disc, and it's an artifact, but it acts a lot more like Pernicious Deed, where you play this on turn 3, and then you untap, and then you can use its ability to wipe the board. But to be honest, I think the most important thing for Modern purposes that gets overlooked is the fact that it stops fetch lands, right? Like the fact that it prevents on turn 3, if you're on the play, or if you're playing with anything that ramps stuff, you can now even play this as early as turn 2, and now your opponent can't fetch for the rest of the game is a pretty back-breaking thing to do to opponent. And in a deck like Tron, where you aren't playing with fetch lands, you now get a board wipe, a fetch hate, and then there's also like some weird incidental pay life cost things, right? But the fetch lands one is obviously the big one.
That's like, it's funny how the fetch lands thing, the way they're templated, like pay 1 life to search. It's almost like, do you think that if they were to go back to whatever that year that was, like 2001 or 2, when they were designing Onslaught and the fetch lands, and they had the opportunity to be like, okay, so the way we're designing these aren't a mana ability. These are technically an activated ability. Do you think they would change the design? Because I don't think they were ever intended to be like not mana abilities. I think they just hadn't really thought about it yet.
I mean, if they go back in time, they never ban fetch lands.
No, I'm saying, wait, not in Pioneer.
No, I mean, ever. I think Wizards thinks fetch lands are maybe one of the biggest mistakes in Magic.
sorry. You're saying if they could go back, they would never print fetch lands.
Yeah. Like they if we're talking about modern day Magic designers going back in time and getting to decide the templating on fetch lands, their answer is don't print them.
That's a fair point. But if they were like, we're going to print them, should we like add some piece of text to this card that says like this is a mana ability? Do you think they would? Because like that's
I think
thing.
I think the mana ability thing is not that weird, right? Because there's a ton of lands, especially from that era, that don't have mana abilities, and they still print them, right? The new fetch lands from New Capenna, those don't have mana abilities. I think that they maybe template them so that they follow the commander color philosophy. So you can't play like Arid Mesa in a red blue deck. You have to have red and white. They would have added like tap to find a mountain or swamp, red white mana symbols in there somewhere to like make it so it doesn't work the way it currently does. That's, I don't know how you do that, but that would be my guess. Other cards that other staples that get turned off by Karn Silex, Street Wraith.
Oh yeah, fair. Okay, you can't pay. Yeah.
Is a big one.
100% true though, actually, because it says cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. That's like
cycling is an activated ability.
Oh, I guess it's classically, yeah, it is a cycling. Yeah, you're right. Never mind.
That's probably the biggest one after fetch lands, to be honest. But like not an illegitimate and like not a bad deck to have a good hay card against. So yeah. So that's really the other big one. As far as the pay life feature goes, but that's in Modern a massive one, and especially for a deck like Tron that is looking for a 3 mana board wipe. Like, does this replace what's the 3 mana other one that it uses?
Yeah. It's Oblivion Stone.
Oblivion, like this, I think is a argument to replace Oblivion Stone. It's worse late game where you need it. Like if you top deck it, it's worse. But early game, it's so much more backbreaking and more relevant more often. So yeah, I think this card's really cool. Next artifact. Relic of Legends, 3 mana for an artifact. Tap it to add 1 mana of any color, but more importantly, tap an untapped legendary creature you control. Add 1 mana of any color. I don't know what it is now. I don't have the idea, but there is definitely a Mox Amber, Ragavan, Dragon Rage Channeler, Eggs deck that this could be a part of. That is maybe not going to be tier 1 or tier 2, but it's definitely a thing that someone's going to pull off at some point in my life.
Yeah, I was reading about this one online quite a bit, and like some people had ideas about like various different, infinite untap sort of whatnot things you can do with this. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I mean, like there are definitely combos that can get done. I think Freed from the Real was one of the cards that came to mind, right? Because tap and untap legendary control to add 1 mana of any color, and that one for 1 tap with the aura, you can untap the creature, so that goes, infinite. You can untap 1 million times. Things like this tend to always be 3-card combos, and the reason they're not like slam dunks is because it's very hard to assemble a 3-card combo. There's a million of them that are very cool. I think this card is interesting. I don't think it sets up in the way that like Basalt Monolith can like play with anything that allows for like a permanent untapping, you just win. Like that's what you need Fist to work, and this doesn't work that way. So, it's cool. It has some cool application. There's probably some legendary creatures that have interesting stuff you can do with this. But in terms of Modern being like a staple, I think it's a little bit underpowered. I see the next one you have down here is Weatherlight Completed. I also have this on my list. This is a really interesting card. I read it and I was like, is this good enough to put on the list? I think it is. And I was like, but wait. The only thing that came to mind for me was Yawgmoth. So let's talk about the card. Like it's a 2 mana vehicle legendary artifact, 5/5, Weatherlight Completed, flying. As long as Weatherlight Completed has 4 or more Phyresis counters on it, it is a Phyrexian creature in addition to its other types. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a Phyresis counter on Weatherlight Completed, then draw a card if it has 7 or more counters on it. If it doesn't, scry 1. So this is a vehicle for 2 that until it is in good shape and you can be drawing cards off of it every time a creature dies, you scry 1. But it doesn't have a crew cost, which is interesting, right? Like the fact that it doesn't have a crew cost means it's a pure engine combo card. Like you have to like build this into a thing and then it's good. But until then, it's scrying you something. That's basically what it does.
So 2 mana, whenever a creature dies that you control, you scry, and then eventually you draw a card. Like 2 mana for a 5/5 flyer that anytime a creature you control dies, draw a card. Ignoring that you have to work to get there is a very powerful ability, right? 2 mana for a thing that you can't get rid of very easily that gives you some amount of value as you build up to that threat or even the card draw capabilities is also on the verge of playable as long as it has that end game. I think it's possible that this will see play in Modern. I agree that the Yawgmoth decks as a sideboard card possibly is where I would maybe start to think about it, but other aristocrat builds, that Mardu deck that we were talking about earlier also, where because tokens count, right? Like it's not a non-token creature, which like often whenever a creature dies, draw a card effect isn't on that type of effect. It also is good in like the Goblin deck that we were talking about as well, right? Where it's like those are decks that often creatures are going to die anyways because you're going to like swing things. And if you have this as a backup plan and also allows you to scry to make sure you have the right cards on top for Snoop, like I think that's where I'm like, it does so many little things that then builds to something that is just on paper very powerful that I think it's like a legitimate card.
I would just say that in general, like the synopsis of what you were just describing is that decks that play a lot of creatures that benefit off of sacrificing and can get recursion and sacrifice a lot of creatures are quite good. They have been for years, whether you're talking about the old Birthing Pod decks or you're talking about the Goblins deck or you're talking about Yawgmoth. Like anytime a deck of that variety gets good, this is a card that plays well in that deck. So it's sort of like this card will be like, I guess even if this card goes into standard, doesn't make a modern impact, and then drops down to like $2, if you see it at like the cheap point, I'd buy 4 of these because I think that there'll be a moment when there will be a creature deck that plays really well with this that will all of a sudden want to be playing 1 or 2 or 3 of these.
Well, like remember we were talking about the fecundity like issue, right? Like this in Goblins does what fecundity does after they sacrifice 7 creatures with Skirt Prospector, which is not hard for that deck to do. This fits right into that deck and is better than fecundity is often. You know, you look at this in there's just so many different cool places this card goes to, and it's powerful on its own. And like over a turn, you might just have a game that many creatures die under your board for other reasons that you just get to have a 5/5 flyer that is like a late game thing that they have to deal with. Yeah, it's really cool. It's like a very interesting design. It's, in my opinion, the best Weatherlight card ever printed too, which I think is funny because it's now Phyrexianized.
We have 3 of them now, right? Like the Skyship Weatherlight, there's the Weatherlight weapon or something, and now there's this one.
There's the original one that was like weird before vehicles. There's the last one, which was like when they were like being a little safer with vehicles because they were afraid after the Smuggler's Copter. And then now there's this one, which is really dope. All right, that's it for artifacts for me.
That's all I have. Yeah, there was this one that I wrote down that was like the 1 mana one where you could like inscribe tablet. 1 colorless tap, sacrifice inscribed tablet, reveal the top 5 cards of your library, put a land card from among them into your hand, and add the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. If you didn't put a land card into your way, this hand draw a card. I think because it makes you put a land into your hand, it's bad, but I saw this and I was like, is this just actually good in Tron? Because like it's 1 and you tap 1 and sacrifice it and you dig 5 and you get a land, but if you don't get a land, you draw a card. Like, I think it's bad. I just wrote it down just in case.
I think it's borderline. It's borderline. I would say it's better than I kind of read it. The Tron case kind of sold me on it, where it's like you're digging 6 cards, right? You either the first 5 cards are the card you need in Tron, or you get to draw a random card at the end. Makes it kind of worthwhile. That's interesting. And also, like, you can search for it with Urza Saga, so it's also a generic thing that's like a little bit safer to play and better throughout the game. I do wish you could just fail to find and draw the card.
Yeah, like exactly. If it was not had to may, then the card would be quite good.
Yeah, I think it becomes like great at that point. Now I think it's just fine, for sure. All right, into lands.
You always ask yourself the question on a card like that: do you think they like toyed with that design? Probably. They probably looked at it and were like,
I think they tried it and they did that, and they're like, oh, this is actually a staple. We now created a better card than blue cards get, anyways. Let's make it worse. It's so much text that it feels like the fiddliest version of it was what they ended up with for balance.
Right.
All right, on to lands. So I have 2 lands. There's a third one that I realize we should probably talk about too. Obviously, this set is like has some gorgeous lands. It has the tapped common dual lands that are not going to be modern playable. It has the return of pain lands, which are really exciting. But the 3 cards that really kind of jump out to me. The first one, and this is what I played with last night in draft, and it's Crystal Grotto, and it's a land that when it enters the battlefield, scry 1, you can tap it to make colorless. You can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color. And this is a little bit of a shout out for a format that me and Ben have been working on for a while called Artisan, which is a variant on Commander, but you only get to play with common, uncommons, and rares. This is one of the best lands ever printed for that format. The fact that it comes into play, and to the extent that I was like, wait, is this more playable than I think people are giving credit for? The fact that this is a scry land that comes into play untapped, I think is being underlooked. I don't think that's existed before, right?
I mean, so
I'm Googling now because I feel like I should have that information. So a land that when it enters the battlefield, it scries.
Yeah, I guess I actually skipped over this card when I got to first see it because I don't think I even really connected with the fact like an untapped colorless scryland is like actually pretty legit.
There is from the Forgotten Realms. There's a colorless land that when it enters the battlefield tapped scry 1, and then Zalfirian Void. I don't think that's from the Commander set. Oh no, it's only in the Commander set, so that's not constructed. So this is the first non-Commander focused untapped land that scries. And on top of that, it has the benefit of also being able to fix your mana in one of the ways that generally is pretty bad, but not impossibly bad. Like this is a play. I think this is better than it's getting credit for.
I agree. I think, look, one thing I've always said, and this is in modern, but modern decks are so much more defined than the other formats. The Highlander format, we always talked about, like, I mean, back when we used to build our decks, we would use those tapped scry lands because those are good lands, but you realize more and more that, like, turn 1 not having an untapped source is so devastating that, like, you have to build your deck around basically always making sure that on turn 1 you could play something. And, you know, if this isn't a deck, it probably means that deck can utilize a colorless source on turn 1, which is plenty of decks. There's plenty of good ideas for decks that do that. And I don't think you're wrong. I think this is a really unique effect.
Both Tron and Eldrazi decks, where the colorless is a color that they want, and in Tron, they don't really need color mana most of the time, but once they have a ton of mana, they need to be able to cast some of their spells later, or they like need to kind of fix for it. The scry ability is maybe worth it. I don't like it. We could be totally wrong. This could see no play, but like this card feels like it's going under the radar more than any other card in this set, just from a perspective of like a tapped 2 color land, like the gates, the fetchable ones here, right? Or gates, yeah, just gate cards in general are bad and constructed, right? But add scry 1 to them and they become format divining mana fixing, which was the temples. And this loses a color, but comes into play untapped and can fix the color just at a mana cost.
Yeah.
I don't know. That seems good to me.
I mean, when you think about the fact that like
I had it in my draft deck last night that I went 7-2 in. I won whatever the draft format is.
A low key flex. I won 7-2 last night in the draft.
I drew it in multiple games as early as turn 1, and just being able to scry and then have the mana untapped was so powerful, surprisingly powerful every single time. This almost says draw a card, play a land, because like normally a scry effect would be half of a card, but then your land would be tapped. So I don't know. I agree with you. This card's flying under the radar is one of the best cards in the set.
I love it.
At least for Standard and Pioneer. Like Modern is the one place where it might be not powerful enough, but Modern is also the one format that has like Oath of the Gatewatch in it, right? Oh no, I guess Pioneer has that.
And you're a freaking Pioneer expert at this point. You guys will hear more about it. Our last card, we both have it on our lists. It was the first
card.
I
have one other land after this one, but this is the second to last land.
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay, so the Thrawn Portal. Land Gate. Thrawn Portal enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands or fewer other lands. As Thrawn Portal enters the battlefield, choose a basic land type. It enters the battlefield as the chosen type, and mana abilities of Thrawn Portal cost an additional 1 life to activate.
So it's a fast land, pain land, basically, and you can get a color of your choice off of it.
Well, and it's any land type. So for these domain decks we're talking about, this can be an untapped on turn 1, on turn 2 mana source that turns domain on.
Correct.
Guaranteed. Turns the domain color that you're missing. This helps you accomplish.
So this is accomplishing what a pain land does while still accomplishing a land type, which is the biggest difference between classically a fast land, a pain land, a pathway, any good land that is not a mana type land. I just think
it also, as a small aside, it's also a gate, which like, A, I love that they're putting gates on just like random cards now. I think that's a really cool idea. And 2, like in Maze's End type decks or other gate card decks, this is a relevant thing.
Yeah, agreed.
Not modern playable yet, but one day maybe.
I read it and I was like, if I get proven wrong and this by rate is a little better than what's out there, I'll be unsurprised, but I think it's just conditionally enough, not quite good enough. I think it's like I think the benefit of it is that domain aggro decks want this land very badly because the triomes are bad in those decks. You don't want to play a triome in a deck where you're trying to curve out turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 with beater after beater. This card's great in those decks. Yes.
And there's not a lot of other good options for them. All right, and now here's the last card of a review. Then we're done. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you for people joining. If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, we do reviews whenever a set comes up, but we talk about Modern, we talk about Commander, we talk about Pioneer, we never talk about Standard. I don't even know if I could tell you a Standard deck from the last 48 months. But Plaza, please hit that like and subscribe button. We appreciate all of you a great deal. Plaza of Heroes is the card. Land enters the battlefield untapped. Tap to add 1 mana, or tap to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast legendary spells. Or you may tap it to add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control. So once you have a legendary spell in play, like a Ragavan, this can cast Ragavan, and then taps for red after that. And then you can pay 3, exile it, target legendary creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, giving that Ragavan hexproof and indestructible, making sure you can attack with a few creatures, and if they try blocking it, it doesn't die. The first parts of this, like obviously in Commander, this is a nuts card that should be in every Commander deck. Basically, that's more than 2 colors ever printed. But for the purposes of Modern, 2 things. 1, we are more and more getting closer to legendary tribal decks existing. There's enough redundancy of effects. There's enough benefits for having legendary creatures that are really powerful that almost similar to how spirits and elementals and humans have all eventually evolved into a constructed deck because just there's so many cards printed around it. Legendaries are among them, and Wizards keeps pushing it. And if that deck ever exists, this card will be a 4-of staple in that deck. B, it plays perfectly with like the fact that it like can play 1-drop, 2-drop legendary creatures and fix mana for them, and then uses them to fix mana for your non-legendary creature spells on top of that is like very versatile to me. That last ability doesn't matter. It's those first 2 that really are fascinating.
Back in the first Kamigawa set, they printed Isimaru and other creatures that were not cards that traditionally felt like they would be legendary, but they were given the legendary type because of the nature of the set. And since then, basically, that's pretty much, I think, since, like 2004, basically, they have toyed with introducing a Legendary Matters theme. Now, some sets do it, some sets don't. You get cards like, whatever that card, something Hero's Blade or whatever, and then you get cards that are powerful, like Mox Amber, that slowly but surely over time reflect the payoff. And the more of these things they do and the more of these things they print, the more a deck like that becomes viable. We're already in a phase where Legendary Modern is like a deck that people try sometimes that like already exists. A card like this fits really nicely into a deck like that. And it does feel like with Ragavan now being printed, we're probably on the cusp of the Legendary Matters Tier 1 Modern deck existing. I don't know if we're quite there yet. This card definitely helps. The thing is, mana in those decks was already pretty good, so just this card existing doesn't make your mana in those decks that much better. It's like makes it, I guess, less painful or something. But the second ability, or the third ability, I should say, the like you can help out your creatures by sacking a land ability is pretty good. I think
that's the fourth ability. There are 4 abilities on this card.
Probably this card, if there was a Legendary Matters creature aggro deck, would be a 1 of, unfortunately, is my guess, because I think you would just be able to make your mana better without it.
I don't like Ancient Ziggurat is seeing saw play in humans, right? And I think this card is significantly better in legendary creature decks than Ancient Ziggurat deck. And lets you play the spells that aren't legendaries, right? Like Ancient Ziggurat doesn't tap for mana unless it is a creature. This taps for colorless mana. This taps for colored mana if you have a legendary in play. Like, I think this is a easy 4 of in those legendary creature decks, especially because they probably are 5 color. But
yes, you're right. It's not legendary, so like playing 4 of it is like not much of a downside. It's just like it feels like you would activate that last ability, the equivalent of a 1 in 4, like 1 in 60 ability. Like that's a rare occurrence.
I see this as like a painless mana confluence, or a Ancient Ziggurat that can cast not the theme based spells, or card, not a like the indestructible thing. Is nice, but it's not the reason I would ever play this card.
Yeah, I would agree. Interesting set, guys. A lot of cool stuff. I think we covered as many cards as we possibly could. If we missed something, put it in the comments. Let us know. I think some of the stuff that cost 4 CMC or greater was probably stuff that we were a little harsher on, but I know we threw in a lot of cool cards that we thought were very, very interesting in that low CMC range. Let us know your thoughts. Otherwise, thank you for sticking with us for kind of a longer episode. This was the like in the classic style of set reviews where we got to really cover a lot of stuff. It was very, very fun. This is coming out the early week in September. I have mentioned to you guys that I have been on tour all summer. I have been doing it the whole summer, and I have only 2 shows left. New York on the 17th of September, and then LA on October 1st. And I will have my next single dropping. It's called Stop Sign. I've been working on it for literally 8 months. That's not an exaggeration. My next single will be dropping here in the next few weeks. I just got to announce on my other show that my song, Late Night Love Song, was put into Kevin Smith's film Clerks 3, which is really exciting. I go to the movie premiere and do the whole thing there and see that. I've been holding on to that information. So there's some kind of cool, exciting momentum stuff. And if you guys have listened to my stuff or thought about it, this next song, Stop Sign, it would mean a lot to me if you checked it out. So be sure to look out for anything we post, because I'll be sharing the link for the pre-save and all that. So that's my news.
Awesome. And honestly, the Kickstarter just landed. Please follow me on TikTok, making TikTok content. I'm almost at 20,000 followers, which is really cool. I am keep trucking along. Thanks everyone so much for listening and watching the podcast. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you to all of our sponsors. And we will talk to you all next week.
Bye, guys.
This has been a production of Time Traveler